Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. Marvel. I inherited the Kingdom of Shadows. Chapter 1. A certain eastern region, a barren desert war zone. In the dark cave, the stronghold of the Ten Commandments gang, a white man slowly woke up. The intense pain made the man frown instantly and let out a cry of pain. Ah, where am I? The man sat up slowly, but felt that something was implicating him. Reaching out to pull out the oxygen tube in his nose, and looking at the iron bump on his chest that was connected to the wire, the man looked dazed. At this time, a sound came from the side. If I were you, I wouldn't move around. There is a piece of shrapnel in your body, which is very close to your heart. If you don't have this thing, then your life will be gone. Hearing this, the man's face changed suddenly. He didn't know whether the old man in front of him was telling the truth, but he didn't dare to bet. Just when he was about to ask more, a sharp pain suddenly hit his mind. At the same time, a series of memory fragments flashed quickly in his mind like a movie. A few minutes later, the pain in the man's head eased, but his face became even uglier. It is mixed with various emotions such as weirdness and astonishment. He just fell asleep normally, and never thought that he would travel through time when he woke up. He also crossed over and became the famous Iron Man, Tony Stark. As Marvel's super popular character, Tony Stark can be described as world-renowned, known as the existence of gods with the power of mortals. Realizing this, Tony was overjoyed at first. He had been unsatisfactory in his previous life, and he had nothing to worry about. What is there to be dissatisfied with now that he has traveled through time to become the famous Iron Man? However, the joy in his heart didn't last long, and his complexion soon became ugly. Tony. The reason why Stark can stand shoulder to shoulder with the gods is not due to any mutation, but his clever brain. Although he replaced Tony's identity now, he did not inherit his smart brain. And if he's not mistaken, he's in the first part of Iron Man, Tony, the episode where Stark is kidnapped. This time Tony Stark, the iron suit hasn't been made yet. In other words, although he inherited Tony's identity, he also killed the existence of Iron Man. After all, he was a good young man in his previous life, but he couldn't make a steel battle suit. If it's just that, Tony is uncomfortable, but he won't be sad. He doesn't have much interest in being a superhero. It's not bad to be an ordinary billionaire like this. However, his current situation is being kidnapped, and those kidnappers are about to threaten him to make missiles. But he can make a woolen missile. Once those terrorist kidnappers know the situation, can he still live? I'm afraid they will chop him up and feed them to the dogs. Thinking of this, Tony panicked. And just when he was in a state of panic, a cold electronic synthesis sound suddenly sounded in his mind. Ding, you have become the heir to the Shadow Kingdom. The Dark Lottery system is at your service. Name, Tony Stark. Gender, male. Identity, heir of the Shadow Kingdom. Ability, none. Novice gift pack, to be opened. Number of draws, 0. Mission release. Escape from birth. Mission introduction. You are in a very dangerous situation now, and you may be chopped up by kidnappers and fed to dogs at any time. Please escape from this place as soon as possible to get out of danger. Task reward. Number of lottery draws +1. Control authority of the Ninja Corps of the Shadow Kingdom. Looking at the series of messages that appeared in front of him, Tony was slightly dazed, his face constantly changing. In the end, a trace of ecstasy welled up in his heart, causing the corners of his mouth to curl up with joy. It is said that golden fingers are necessary for crossing, and netizens do not deceive me. Although, he may not be able to manufacture the steel suit, leaving the world with one less Iron Man. But with the help of the system, he will only become a stronger existence than Iron Man. Fortunately, he was not overwhelmed by the surprise and knew what the most urgent task was now. Open the novice package. Ding, congratulations on getting 10 ninja soldiers. Ding, congratulations, you have obtained the permission to travel through the Shadow Kingdom. At the end of the short reminder, Tony only felt an inexplicable power in himself. As long as he drives this power, he can summon 10 ninja soldiers, and he can freely enter and exit the Shadow Kingdom. Tony glanced left and right. The old man who had just spoken had left at some point. With a sinking heart, Tony quietly felt the power, and secretly called out to the ninja soldiers. Come out. The moment the words fell, a black mist appeared in front of his eyes. When the black mist dissipated, 10 figures wrapped in black ninja clothes appeared in front of him. Unlike ordinary ninjas, they were pitch black all over. Including the bare palms, the only thing that defies black is their scarlet eyes, which radiate with the desire to kill. Watching them, Tony looked at them carefully, as if looking at some amazing masterpiece. In the Kingdom of Shadows, there are 9 black shadow corps, and the ninja corps is one of them. They may not be the most powerful in the shadow corps, but they are definitely the most comprehensive in the shadow corps. Whether in battle or in life, they can easily help. Compared with fighting, the shadow corps also has a more powerful ability, immortality. As a soldier born in darkness, as long as he dies, he will be reborn in the Shadow Kingdom. Moreover, they are absolutely loyal to their masters and are the best subordinates. According to the introduction in the anime, the Shadow Kingdom where the Shadow Corps lives can connect to all parts of the world, so can I escape from this place with the help of the Shadow Kingdom? Thinking of this, Tony's heart was moved immediately, and he immediately ordered, "Take me into the Kingdom of Shadows." As soon as the words fell, 2 black shadow ninjas came to him immediately, each with a hand on his shoulder, and they sank to the ground together with him. As Tony disappeared, the shadow ninja he summoned also sank to the ground. Time passed by every minute and every second, and suddenly, on the ground, Tony's figure appeared in the cave again, panting heavily, with a trace of fear in his eyes. He thought of the convenience of the Shadow Kingdom, but forgot to consider the danger of the Shadow Kingdom. As a kingdom of dark creatures, not only the Shadow Corps, but also powerful dark creatures live in the Kingdom of Shadows. Although Tony is the successor of the Shadow Kingdom, he is only a title and has no real power yet. Today, he can only summon 10 ninja soldiers, and this is still a gift package for beginners given to him by the system. As a living person, breaking into the Shadow Kingdom is like a light in the dark, extremely dazzling. Tony, who had just entered the Shadow Kingdom, was greeted with a violent attack by dark creatures before he had time to take a look. If it weren't for the protection of 10 ninja soldiers, his life would have almost stayed in the Shadow Kingdom. It seems that I may have to control 10 Shadow Corps first, and only then can I become the real master of the Shadow Kingdom. A wry smile appeared on the corner of Tony's mouth. He looked at the sunlight outside the cave, and a cold look flashed in his eyes. No way, I can only kill it. Tony's voice fell, his eyes filled with killing intent, but soon, he restrained his killing intent. As a dark faction, although the strength of the Shadow Corps is not affected by day and night, they can exert even stronger strength at night. At present, he can only summon 10 dark ninjas. Just in case, Tony decided to wait until the night fell before starting to act. Making up his mind, Tony soon fell into a deep sleep. Having just woken up, he experienced a series of great sorrows and great joys, his mind was full of exhaustion, and he needed more rest. As for his own safety, he didn't need to worry about it for the time being. Since the group of kidnappers wanted him to help them build missiles, he was temporarily safe, so he didn't have to worry too much about them. After sleeping for 2 hours, when Tony woke up again, the sun was about to set. The afterglow of the setting sun sprinkled on the entrance of the cave, reflecting the beauty of the evening. A sound of footsteps suddenly came from the entrance of the cave, and the old man I saw during the day came in with a piece of food. Looking at Tony sitting on the bed, the old man said, "You are hungry, eat something, although the taste is not very good, but I think you should need it." While speaking, he put the food in front of Tony's eyes, and then went to work on his own affairs. Looking at the dark food in the bowl, Tony frowned. If the old man hadn't said it was food, he would have thought it was cement. A bowl of gray paste exuded a somewhat sour smell. If he had a choice, Tony would not eat it. However, he hadn't eaten for a long time, and if he didn't replenish his energy, he wasn't sure if he could still stand up. After hesitating for a while, he finally pinched his nose and ate up the contents of the bowl. Perhaps because of hunger, although the food was unpalatable, it was not hard to swallow. When he ate everything in the bowl, he finally regained some strength in his body. Only then did he have time to look at the old man. In the plot, this old man seems to be also a talent. It is because of his surgery that the predecessor can survive and have the opportunity to create a steel suit. Tony was silent for a moment, then said, "Hey, old man, what's your name, why are you here?" The old man who was flipping through the books glanced at him and replied in a flat tone, "Inson Bogley, I am a prisoner just like you, so don't expect me to rescue you." Obviously, Yingson thought that Tony wanted him to help him escape, so he interrupted Tony's thoughts directly. Tony didn't mind this, and didn't continue to speak. If the old man is willing, he doesn't mind letting the old man follow him when he leaves. Time gradually passed, and the night became darker and darker. Outside the cave, a cloud of black mist emerged. 10 ninja soldiers appeared quietly, and then quickly disappeared in place like ghosts. Tony sat on the bed, looked at the darkness outside the cave, and couldn't help but let out a sigh of emotion. The moon is dark and the wind is high, killing night. The camp of the 10 Commandments gang was not too far from the cave, it was halfway up the mountain. In order to block the cave, their camp was built directly around the entire mountainside, with tents standing on the mountainside. Although it was dark at night, the camp of the 10 rings was still brightly lit, the roar of the generator kept ringing in the night, and teams of patrols wandered around the entire camp. Compared with the general armed forces of evil forces, their vigilance is outstanding, and the possibility of being attacked is basically eliminated. If the general army attacked at night, the members of the 10 Commandments gang would be able to react quickly. But what they have to face today is not an ordinary army, but a ninja corps from the Shadow Kingdom. Although there were only 10 of them, the strength of each of them had already exceeded the limit of human beings. The camp was brightly lit, but it was impossible to dispel all the darkness. Not long after, a patrol team patrolled into a dark area. The moment the team entered the darkness, pairs of scarlet eyes suddenly appeared. Immediately, the expressions of the members of the patrol team changed, and they were about to speak one by one. Puff puff, but before they could make a sound, there was a series of meat-cutting sounds of blades slicing through throats. The members of the entire patrol team only felt a sharp pain in their throat, and their vitality was rapidly drained, and they fell to the ground one after another, turning into corpses. As these people fell, the black shadow ninjas slowly walked out in the darkness, each dragging a corpse into the darkness. Soon, the scene was cleaned up, not even a trace of blood remained. The whole process was silent, and the cooperation between the shadow ninjas was full of tacit understanding, and the killing slowly bloomed in the darkness. What happened in this corner did not attract the attention of the 10 Rings gang at all, and the shadow ninja continued to hide in the darkness, killing the patrol team in the camp bit by bit. As long as someone walked into the darkness, no one came out again. This situation continued until 12 o'clock in the middle of the night, and some members of the 10 Rings gang finally noticed something was wrong. Mountain Wolf, Nightingale, please answer if you hear it, please answer it if you hear it. In a tent, a bald man held a walkie-talkie and said in a solemn tone. He is the captain of the patrol team and is responsible for coordinating and dispatching. Just now, he suddenly received a report from members of the patrol team, and the patrol team seemed to be missing a few teams. The bald head's first reaction was that it was impossible. His team members were not bad, and they had experienced professional military training. Even if something happened, it would be impossible to remain silent. But after he called several times in succession, but still didn't get any response, he had to believe that something had happened. An enemy has entered the camp. Realizing this, the bald man quickly said, "Sound the alarm, there is an enemy invasion." After the words fell, a member beside him quickly pressed the alarm button, and there was a rush of sirens in the camp. The camp that had fallen into silence came alive in an instant, and noisy voices sounded from the tents, and the members of the 10 Rings gang who had already rested quickly put on their equipment and walked out of the tents. At the same time, the shadow ninjas who were only hunting in the dark scattered away at the moment the siren sounded. He didn't need anyone's order to kill directly in the camp. As a killing weapon, the black shadow ninja has fully integrated into the killing instinct. Whether it was hiding in the dark and killing in the beginning, or killing in all directions now, it was all subconscious behaviors of them. They will make the most favorable killing behavior according to the current environment. Soon, many members of the 10 Rings gang had their throats cut by icy blades just as they walked out of the tent and before they could join up with their companions. Corpses fell to the ground one after another, and killings broke out in the camp. Many people saw the figure of the black shadow ninja flashing past, and shouted and cursed in their mouths. Fake, what is that? There are enemies, shoot, shoot. In an instant, there was a loud gunshot, and countless bullets poured towards the Black Shadow Ninja. Looking at this scene, the scarlet light in the eyes of the Black Shadow Ninja became more vigorous, and the ninja sword in his hand kept waving. There was a clanging sound, and a large number of bullets were directly smashed with a knife. Seeing such a scene, everyone in the Ten Rings gang was full of fear. But the Black Shadow Ninjas did not hesitate at all, and rushed directly to the crowd in a flash. The ghostly speed surpassed everyone's imagination, and before they could react, the Black Shadow Ninja had already submerged into the crowd, setting off boundless killings. There was a sound of flesh piercing, and many people fell to the ground before they could even scream. Blood flowed from the throat, gradually staining the ground red. And this scene was not an isolated case, but was staged within the entire camp. The 10 Black Shadow Ninjas have completely turned into death gods in the dark at this moment, and no one can stop them. All militants could only watch death befall them, dying with endless fear. In the cave, Dr. Yingson, who had already fallen asleep, was awakened by gunshots outside the cave. He sat up and looked in the direction of the cave entrance with a solemn face. Not knowing what happened, he turned his head and glanced at Tony next to him. Seeing that Tony was staring at the entrance of the cave, Yingson couldn't help but said, "Hey, what happened outside?" Hearing this, Tony glanced at him and nodded, "I know, my rescuer is here." "Save you." Dr. Inson's mouth twitched, he shook his head and did not continue speaking. When Tony was sent, everything on his body was destroyed, even if he had a locator, it was useless. Except for the members of the Ten Rings gang, it is impossible for anyone to find this place. So, he didn't believe Tony's words. But he didn't speak, but Tony stood up and said actively, "Let's go, it should be over soon, we can go out." Okay. A trace of suspicion appeared on Dr. Inson's face. Tony ignored him, hugged the battery in front of him, stood up slowly, and walked out of the cave. Seeing this scene, Dr. Inson's face changed instantly. He is a smart person, and it is precisely because of this that he does not believe Tony. But when Tony took the initiative to walk out, he was shaken. As the head of Stark Industries, a renowned genius, he didn't believe Tony would be a fool. Now that the outside is obviously in chaos, if he dares to go out at this time, then what he just said is very likely to be true. Someone really came to save him. Thinking of this, Dr. Inson's expression changed, and he quickly followed Tony's footsteps. The two left the cave and walked towards the mountainside. In the silent night, they could hear screams from time to time. As the two approached, the screams became less and less, and in the end they were almost inaudible. Gudong. Dr. Inson swallowed hard, feeling a little flustered. He didn't notice it at first, but now he suddenly realized it. The gunfire in the camp was not intense. If the members of the Ten Rings gang were attacked by the army or other armed forces, the gunshots should have been very intense. But apart from the gunshots he heard in the cave just now, he has only heard scattered gunshots so far. It doesn't look like two armed forces are fighting. So besides the armed forces, who is raiding the Ten Rings? What happened to the screams from the camp? People are afraid of making up their minds. Thinking about it, Dr. Yingson, a Christian believer, was instantly filled with fear. A cross appeared in his hands at some point, and he held it tightly. His eyes were focused on Tony, trying to find a sense of security from him. In this way, the two stepped into the camp quickly one after the other. Vomit. A burst of vomiting suddenly came from Dr. Inson's mouth. Standing on the edge of the camp, looking at the stumped limbs and arms, and the corpses all over the ground, he couldn't help but vomit in an instant, having been obsessed with research. A look of shock filled his face. Even though his physical reaction made him uncomfortable, he still couldn't believe it when he watched the scenes in the camp. "How did you do it?" Dr. Inson said tremblingly. The corners of Tony's mouth suddenly turned up, "Yes." After speaking, he ignored the corpses all over the ground and walked towards the center of the camp. After taking control of the Black Shadow Ninja, some changes in his mind inadvertently occurred. The most obvious point is that the Shira scene, which is unbearable for ordinary people, does not cause any waves for him at all. Walking among the blood and corpses, Dr. Inson followed behind him with a pale face. Soon, the two came to the tent in the center of the camp and found a satellite phone on a messy table. Seeing this, Tony couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Resolving these members of the Ten Rings gang is only the first step, and more importantly, how they leave this desert is the key. The importance of satellite phone is self-evident. Holding the phone, Tony was about to call Pepper, but when he was about to press the call button, he couldn't help but stop. If he remembered correctly, the mastermind behind his kidnapping seemed to be his uncle Obadiah. Moreover, Obadiah wanted him to die in this desert. It's just that the Ten Rings wanted the missile, which saved Tony's life. As the number one figure in Stark Industries, Obadiah will definitely know once Pepper uses the power of the Stark Group. How could Obadiah, who wanted to kill himself, just watch him return to Stark Industries? I am afraid that other armed forces will be contacted immediately to carry out a second assassination on him. Tony is naturally not afraid, it's just that it's a waste of time. He needs to leave here as soon as possible and return to the country. Although he has killed all the kidnappers, the system has not judged that the mission is complete, and perhaps he must return home safely to truly escape. So, Tony deleted the number, re-entered another string of numbers and dialed out. Soon, with a beep, the phone was connected, and a slightly tired voice came from the phone. "I'm Rhodes, what's the matter?" "Rod is me, Tony." "Fake, where are you now?" After hearing Tony's voice, Rhodes became excited on the other end of the phone. During this period of time when Tony disappeared, the U.S. military was in a state of distress. As Tony's guard member and friend, Rhodes couldn't sleep for several days. Now that he suddenly heard Tony's voice, how could he not be excited? Put the phone away from his ear, and after Rhodes vented, Tony spoke again. "I don't know the exact location yet, you find someone to track the signal of this phone to pick me up. By the way, remember to hide a little bit and keep quiet." Listening to Tony's calm words, Rhodes quickly calmed down. "What do you mean?" Rhodes said in a low voice. To become a military colonel, his intelligence is naturally not bad, and he immediately heard the meaning behind Tony's words. Tony didn't explain this, but just urged, "We'll see each other later, hurry up." "Okay, I get it." Rhodes hung up the phone, selected 50 elites overnight, and followed the signal to the depths of the desert. The night passed quickly. When the sun rose the next day, the convoy of Colonel Rhodes and others followed the signal and arrived at the camp of the Ten Rings gang. Cough cough. Colonel Rhodes coughed and waved away the yellow sand in front of him, looking at the barren camp in front of him with a trace of vigilance on his face. A heavily armed soldier quickly stepped forward to clear the way, holding a gun in his hand and looking vigilant. At the same time, in the camp, the two of Tony also heard the sound of the car outside, and they immediately walked out of the tent after not sleeping all night. Soon, the two sides met in the camp. "Shet, Tony, you're all right, that's great." Seeing Tony, the vigilant Colonel Rhodes immediately greeted him with a happy face. 50 heavily armed soldiers scattered around and began to be vigilant, but none of them noticed anything unusual. Only Dr. Ensign, who had been following Tony, changed his expression. He remembered that there were corpses everywhere in the camp last night, and blood flowed all over the ground, the entire Shira field. But now, nothing. The camp was clean, not to mention corpses, not even the smell of blood. How can that be? Thinking of this, Dr. Ensign suddenly looked at Tony's back with some fear. What secret is hidden in this man? Just when he was in a daze, Colonel Rhodes also noticed him staying behind Tony, looked him up and down immediately, and asked softly, "Tony, who is he?" "A poor fellow like myself." "Oh," Rhodes responded, but obviously didn't believe Tony's words. But he didn't pursue it, but asked how Tony escaped. For this question, Tony didn't have a good explanation, he could only say vaguely, "Last night, the terrorists here evacuated for some reason, and I don't know." After finishing speaking, Tony shrugged helplessly, giving the impression that he didn't know anything at all. "Really, that's really God's blessing. Let's go, let's get out of here first." Colonel Rhodes took a deep look at Tony, his eyes full of doubts, but because of his relationship with Tony, he didn't want to talk about it, and he couldn't get to the bottom of it, so he could only expose the matter. Anyway, Tony is fine, which is the best news. The group got into the vehicle without delay. Due to the lack of sleep all night, Tony and Dr. Ensign fell asleep shortly after getting into the car. Tony still held the huge battery in his arms, causing Colonel Rhodes to keep looking sideways along the way. 2 hours later, Tony finally returned to the U.S. military camp, and his tense mind could not help but relax. As a capital-oriented country, Tony and the U.S. government are in the stage of friendly cooperation, so Tony is not worried that the U.S. government is not good for him. Without staying in the camp too much, Tony soon took Dr. Inson on a military helicopter and headed for New York. As for Colonel Rhodes, he had to stay here for a while because of his mission, so he didn't accompany him. After sending Tony away, Rhodes also passed the news of Tony's rescue back to the United States, which also included the weirdness of the whole incident. As a friend, he would not take the initiative to pry into Tony's hidden secrets. But as a professional soldier, he will not ignore the doubts in this matter. Among other things, the armed kidnappers spent so much effort to capture Tony, and then retreated in a hurry, leaving Tony in the desert, which is unreasonable in any way. Tony didn't know anything about Rhodes' actions. After a 3-hour journey, he finally returned to bustling Manhattan from the deserted desert. After the plane landed, Xiao Zhao and others got the news almost immediately and rushed to the military area. Back in Manhattan, Tony was no longer afraid of the threat posed by Obadiah, so he didn't have to hide his whereabouts anymore. At the entrance of the military area, when Tony walked out with Dr. Yingson, he immediately saw a row of luxury cars parked at the entrance. A large group of bodyguards in suits stood respectfully aside, led by a tall and beautiful professional beauty in a professional skirt. Looking at her, relevant information suddenly appeared in Tony's mind: Virginia Potts. The right-hand man of the predecessor and the sweetheart of the former, and later, also known as Little Pepper. With a smile on the corner of his mouth, Tony walked up quickly, and Potts also quickly greeted him at this moment. Without any hesitation, Tony hugged Potts and kissed him deeply. The sudden action made Potts stunned. Although she was also very excited that Tony had returned safely, it was a bit beyond her expectation to kiss directly in the public. But after reacting, she didn't refuse, but responded more enthusiastically. She already liked Tony, but because of Tony's style, she kept a distance. And after Tony's disappearance, she had long since lost her previous reserve, and now, under Tony's initiative, she responded without the slightest shyness. Everyone around looked at this scene, coughed lightly, and quickly looked away. They didn't dare to meddle in the big boss's affairs. After a while, Tony let go of Potts, smiled and waved, "Go home." After finishing speaking, he hugged Potts in his arms and got into the car. Naturally, it was impossible for Yingson to ride in the same car with the two of them, so he could only sit with the bodyguards. In the car, Potts had sorted out his emotions, restored his image of a strong woman, and reported on the situation of Stark Industries during the period when Tony disappeared. If it were Stark before, he might have been impatient at this moment, but now Tony listened quietly and didn't interrupt her. Among them, there are two most critical points. The first is the disappearance of Tony, which caused the stock of Stark Industries to drop by nearly percentage points all the way. The second is Obadiah. During this period of time, he has won over many shareholders and seized more power from Stark Industries, which means that he will replace Tony. After Potts finished his report, Tony said, "Don't worry about the stock falling. Now that I'm back, the stock will naturally rise back. As for the matter of Obadiah, my good uncle really took great pains, but since I'm back, he has no chance. Collect his evidence and hold a shareholders' meeting. I will kick him out." After saying that, Potts' face changed. Well, Obadiah is the second largest shareholder after all, and he still holds half of the group's power. If you want to move him, I'm afraid the whole group will be shaken. You have just come back now, the group needs to be stable, shall we wait? Potts' suggestion is very reasonable. As the second person in the group, if he wants to kick Obadiah out of the game, it can be said that it will affect the whole body. If it was a peaceful world, Tony would definitely plan slowly, but this is Marvel, and Tony has no time to spend time on these intrigues. Immediately, he raised his palm and interrupted Potts' words. "That's the matter, let's cut the mess quickly. As for the group's turmoil, as long as I'm still here, the group won't be able to fall." For Obadiah, Tony had already sentenced him to death in his heart. Going to hell is his only option. Potts was a little dazed by Tony's calm and confident expression. She found that Tony had changed after he came back this time. Although he was a genius before, he was just a libertine. But now, there is a domineering temperament about him, which makes people more fascinated than before. In Liberty City, in Tony's seaside villa, Tony is enjoying the delicious food on the table with a face full of wolf. Although he didn't stay in the desert for long, the birds had already faded out of his mouth, and the first thing he did when he returned home was to satisfy his appetite. As for Potts, after chatting with him, he immediately launched an operation to collect evidence from Obadiah. Yingson also stayed in a villa to rest under his arrangement. Right now, he is the only one in the whole villa. And of course, there's an artificial intelligence, Jarvis. Sir, according to your current physical condition, it is not recommended that you overeat. In addition, according to the test, the energy consumption of the equipment on your chest is huge. If you don't solve it, your body will collapse quickly. Jarvis' voice sounded in the villa, and after Tony swallowed the last bite of steak, he put down his knife and fork in satisfaction. I know my situation very well, so I don't need you to remind me. Jarvis, help me collect it and see if there is any way to solve this iron bump on my chest. Okay, sir, looking for a solution for you. Jarvis responded, then fell silent. Tony looked helplessly at the iron lump on his chest and the battery not far away. In the original book, the predecessor used the miniature arc reactor to maintain life and provide energy for the steel armor. But what should I do now? There is no need to think about the arc reactor. All countries in the world are still in the research stage of this thing, and it has not yet been perfected. What's more, it has to be made the size of a palm, which is simply challenging his cognition. In addition, he doesn't have the brains of his predecessor. Even if he wants to rub an arc reactor out of it, it's impossible. Now we can only see if there is any other way from Jarvis. After waiting for a few minutes, Jarvis' voice sounded again soon. Sir, I'm sorry, according to the system search, the existing technology is not enough to solve the problem in your chest. Even with the most advanced biotechnology, it can only guarantee to prolong your lifespan. As an artificial intelligence, although Jarvis has a high degree of intelligence, he does not have human emotions, and his voice is a bit cold. Hearing this answer, although he had expected it in his heart, Tony still sighed, looking a little helpless. It seems that we still have to find a way from the system. Muttering something in his mouth, Tony was not discouraged, and sought a solution from the outside world, but just wanted to give it a try. His trump card has never been something from the Marvel world, but the system in his mind. Among other things, as long as you can get the dog charm that can live forever and stay young forever, solving the chest problem is nothing more than pediatrics. Thinking of this, Tony suddenly remembered his mission to escape from the sky. As he expected, after he returned to Liberty City, this task was completed. It's just that there were too many people before, and he never had time to receive the task reward. Name: Tony Stark. Gender: male. Identity: heir of the Shadow Kingdom. Ability: control of one of the 9 parts of the Black Shadow Core unintegrated. Number of draws: 1. Task: escape from birth completed. Looking at the personal data that had been refreshed on the information panel, Tony first chose to merge, bringing the Black Shadow Ninja under control. Suddenly, an inexplicable force filled his body, and his physical fitness improved rapidly at this moment. He, who could only control 10 Black Shadow Ninjas, instantly felt his control power greatly improved. Directly from the control authority of 10 Black Shadow Ninjas, completely control the entire core. The Shadow Core is divided into 9 divisions, and the number of each division is endless. Now that he has completely controlled a Black Shadow Ninja, his power has been greatly improved, which is simply unimaginable. In the future, when he goes out, it means that there will be explosive soldiers around him at any time. Even against millions of fully armed regular troops, he is fearless. This power is naturally nothing in the later stages of Marvel. After all, in the era when the timeline was frequently modified, the role of the number of people was greatly reduced. But in the early stage of Marvel, controlling a Black Shadow Ninja, not to mention sweeping an invincible, is definitely the power to stand at the pinnacle of the world. Except for Ji-Yu-Yi and Hulk and the perverts, some other superheroes can consume them to death even if they consume them. What's more, the combat power of the Black Shadow Ninja is not low at all. Feeling better, Tony set his sights on the lottery again. If the Shadow Core improved his power, then the ability obtained by the lottery was to enhance his personal strength. To be honest, although the black shadow core is very fragrant, its own strength is even more fragrant. Rubbing his palms together, Tony directly used the number of draws. Suddenly, a disc appeared in front of his eyes. The disc is black and divided into 12 grids, each grid is marked with a question mark. If you don't pull it out, you don't know what's inside. As the pointer rotated, Tony's mood became tense. In just a few seconds, the speed at which the pointer rotates is no longer visible to the naked eye. Stop! With a loud shout in my heart, the speed of the pointer suddenly slowed down, and soon gradually stopped on a grid. A burst of light appeared in front of his eyes instantly, and soon a horse appeared in front of his eyes. Bah! There was the sound of a horse neighing. The white horse turned into a ray of light and went straight into Tony's head. At the same time, an inexplicable message appeared in Tony's mind, including the pony's power being easily controlled by Tony. Seeing this sudden change, Tony was stunned for a moment, and then a burst of joy appeared on his entire face. There are 8 demons in the adventure, the most powerful of which is the fire demon Holy Lord. The source of the Holy Lord's power is not only the magic energy of fire, but also 12 spells. The 12 talismans are represented by the 12 zodiac signs, and the pony just now is the power of the horse talisman in the 12 talismans. The horse talisman is not a battle talisman, but an auxiliary talisman. It can not only cure all diseases and remove all negative states, but also has a powerful healing ability. As long as there is still a breath, it can be rescued on the spot. This made Tony, who was still suffering from chest problems just now, overjoyed instantly. After mastering the power of the horse charm, he will be the best doctor in the world in the future. As long as he is willing, he can save people who are destined to die. This made Tony think of an old saying in his previous life: the king of Hades wants you to die in the 3rd watch, who dares to keep you until the 5th watch? Tony, I dare. Suppressing the surprise in his heart, Tony looked at the iron lump on his chest, and pulled it out with a slap without saying a word. Suck, hiss. A sharp pain made Tony gasp for an instant, and at the same time a blood hole appeared on his chest. But before the blood flowed out, a burst of milky white light instantly enveloped the blood hole. Immediately, the blood hole recovered rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. In less than a minute, the injury on Tony's chest completely recovered, and his pale face became rosy. Sir, what's the matter? Special biotechnology. Why have I never seen it, and there is no record in the system? Just as Tony was recovering from his injury, Jarvis' voice suddenly sounded in the room. As an artificial intelligence, although it has no human emotions, this does not prevent it from imitating the tone of exclamation, and Jarvis's shock can also be seen at the same time. Hearing this, a smile appeared on Tony's face. Biotechnology, you can also understand it in this way, but I prefer to call this power magic, Tony said in a surprised tone, while Jarvis remained thoughtful and silent. As a product of science and technology, it doesn't understand magic at all. Compared with these fantasy things, it prefers science and technology supported by data. Magic. It seems that human power is far more complicated than I imagined. Jarvis sighed inexplicably, and Tony's voice sounded again. Jarvis, check my current body data. Okay, sir. After speaking, Jarvis immediately scanned it and quickly gave an answer. Sir, your body is very healthy now, and your physical fitness has reached 3 times that of ordinary people, and you are healthier than ever before. Listening to this answer, Tony was completely relieved. Just then, a phone rang. Sir, Miss Potts is calling, are you connected? Go on. After Tony's words fell, Potts' voice suddenly sounded in the villa. Tony, I found out what you asked me to check. Obadiah did betray a lot of group information, but he destroyed all the evidence. I can't find any evidence, sorry. Potts' tone was apologetic. Tony frowned when he heard this, but soon relaxed again. I see. Since I can't find it, then there is no need to search. I can solve him in other ways. It is good, Potts responded, but his curiosity could not be concealed in his tone. She wondered what Tony was going to do with Obadiah. However, seeing that Tony didn't mean to say more, she couldn't ask any more questions, so she could only hang up the phone. When the phone was hung up, Tony's voice sounded again. Jarvis, check where Obadiah is. Okay, sir. Jarvis quickly turned around. As the most perfect artificial intelligence in Marvel, although he knew nothing about magic, no one could compare with it when it came to technology. In the original book, Tony upgraded his armor. In addition to relying on his smart brain, Jarvis also contributed a lot. Even, the predecessor was able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the gods with the strength of mortals, and Jarvis' assistance also accounted for a large part. Even if Tony doesn't plan to take the technological route now, Jarvis is still an important assistant. Sir, the location of Obadiah has been found, and he is now in his own villa. After getting the answer, Tony put on his clothes and left the villa without saying a word. Driving a supercar, Tony headed towards the wealthy area of Liberty City. At the beginning, he planned to kick Obadiah out of the company by formal means, let him fall from heaven to hell, and then kill him. But this guy was obviously smarter than he thought, and he didn't leave any evidence at all. That being the case, Tony can only choose to act forcefully. Firstly, this method is the fastest, and secondly, with the control of a Black Shadow Corps, he has enough confidence to deal with any danger, so naturally there is no need to make false claims with Obadiah. While this guy is the villain of the original books, he's nothing without a Big Mac. He didn't take the technological route in this life. Without his steel suit, Obadiah would have no choice but to make a giant. After all, not everyone is a predecessor, who can use the crude conditions to rub the steel suit with their hands. In just 10 minutes, Tony came to Obadiah's residence. Ding dong. The doorbell rang, and a maid's voice came from the villa. Coming. Soon, the door opened, and the maid saw Tony standing at the door, and said respectfully, "Mr. Tony. Is Uncle Stan at home? I have something to ask him." Tony asked with a smile on his face. The maid immediately nodded and made way for her. "Yes, Mr. Tony, please follow me." Because Tony is the head of Stark Industries, the maid let him walk into the villa without much questioning. When he came to the living room, a 50-year-old white man with a bald head suddenly appeared in front of Tony. He is the most powerful Obadiah in the entire Stark Industrial Empire except Tony, Stan. Looking at Tony, a hint of surprise flashed across Obadiah's face. He had received news of Tony's return before, and he wanted to see Tony, but Tony refused. Unexpectedly, at this time, Tony would come to him. However, Obadiah hid it very well, and the surprise disappeared in a flash, and a smile appeared on his face. "Tony, welcome back. I'm worried that you've been missing for a while. Fortunately, God blesses you and keeps you safe." Looking at the sincere Obadiah, if he hadn't known the old man's true face, Tony would have been almost deceived by him. "By the way, you just came back, why don't you have a good rest at home? How come you have time to come to me?" Obadiah was a little strange, but also full of vigilance in his heart. As a libertine, Tony would rather go out and pick up girls than take the time to meet him, let alone visit him like he is now. It's like the sun is coming out from the west. Seeing Obadiah's puzzled gaze, Tony smiled slightly. "Uncle Stan, I'm here today, and I really want to discuss something with you. I hope you can sell your shares to me. This is the sale contract. Take a look." After speaking, Tony put a contract on the table. As the second largest shareholder of Stark Industries, Obadiah holds a lot of shares. Although he wanted to kill him, he also wanted to get the shares, which was why he made a trip himself. Otherwise, he would just send the Black Shadow Ninja directly. There is no need to come here in person. As soon as these words came out, Obadiah's expression changed instantly. "What do you mean, Tony? Stark Industries, which I established with your father, are you trying to kick me out as a veteran now?" Obadiah asked. Tony didn't hide anything at all, and nodded generously. "You're right, I just want to kick you out." "Then I'm sorry, my shares are not for sale, please get out." Obadiah suppressed his anger. "Uncle Stan, this is not up to you. You have to sell it today, and you have to sell it if you don't." While talking, 20 Black Shadow Ninjas also appeared in the villa in an instant, and a samurai sword shining with cold light fell directly on Obadiah's neck. Suddenly, Obadiah's expression changed instantly. With a warm smile on Tony's face, he looked at Obadiah fixedly. And Obadiah also looked at the Black Shadow Ninja who suddenly appeared in the living room at this moment. His face twitched constantly, and his face became ugly. "Tony, what do you mean? I'm your uncle, don't you still plan to kill me?" Seeing his stern expression, Tony waved his hand quickly. Uncle Stan, you blamed me wrongly. How could I do such a thing? As long as you sell me the shares, I will naturally not make things difficult for you. If not, Tony didn't continue talking, but Obadiah immediately understood the underlying meaning of his words. It's okay to sell the shares, but if he doesn't sell them, he can't guarantee what will happen. And through Tony's persecution, Obadiah also saw more things. Tony respected himself before, but the reason why he has become like this now is that he is aware of what he has done. But, how did he know, and where did this group of obviously not normal humans come from? In just a short moment, the thoughts in his mind turned thousands of times. In the end, he decided that the hero would not suffer the immediate loss, gritted his teeth and said, "Okay, I'll sell it. However, you have to swear in the name of your father, you must let me go afterwards." Obadiah opened the mouth and said that he knew that Tony had a gap with his father on the surface, but in fact he still respected his father very much, and would never make fun of his father's name. As for this condition, Tony agreed without any hesitation. "No problem. I swear in the name of my father, as long as you sell me the shares of the group, I will let you go." Hearing this, Obadiah was obviously relieved, and without hesitation, he directly signed the share transfer contract on the table with a pen. After he finished signing, Tony picked up the contract and checked it. He flicked his fingers and said with a smile, "It's done. Can we let them go now?" Obadiah asked with a gloomy face. A bright smile suddenly appeared on Tony's face. "Okay. However, I said I would let you go, but I didn't say they would let you go. If you want to kill me, of course I will kill you." "Fix him, you liar," Obadiah roared instantly, but before he could continue, the cold blade directly sliced across his throat. Immediately, a blood flower bloomed at his throat. Obadiah's vitality quickly passed away, and the body fell on the carpet. His eyes were fixed on Tony, and he would not rest in peace. "If I don't kill you, wouldn't I be sorry for my predecessor?" Tony smiled playfully, kicked Obadiah's head away, and walked out of the villa. Just after walking out of the living room, Tony saw the maid from just now holding tea and looking at him in horror. Obviously, she saw everything that happened in the living room just now. Seeing this, Tony frowned slightly, snapped his fingers and said, "Get rid of her." Before the maid could react, the cold blade pierced her chest, and there was another corpse on the ground. With the appearance of the maid, Tony also realized that he still needs to deal with the first and last, so he ordered 20 black shadow ninjas to search inside and outside the villa to see if there was anyone else. After confirming that there was no one else, Tony destroyed the surveillance in the villa, and asked the black shadow ninja to drag all the 2 corpses on the ground into the Shadow Kingdom, fed the dark creatures, and then left the villa leisurely. Not long after Tony left, a group of people came outside the villa. They are Obalia's bodyguards. They were sent out by Obalia before, and they just came back now. A group of people stood at the door of the villa, and the leading man in a suit rang the doorbell, but after a while, no one opened the door. The expressions of these people changed one after another, and they broke into the door directly. As top bodyguards, their strength was no weaker than that of the military kings, and they quickly entered the villa. They searched around but couldn't find Obalia, and everyone's expressions turned ugly. At this moment, a bodyguard who was searching the living room let out an exclamation. "Head, come and see." After saying that, the leading man in a suit walked quickly to the living room, and immediately saw his team members standing on the sofa. His gaze subconsciously looked at the sofa, and he saw blood stains on the sofa for the first time. Immediately, his face darkened directly. They were the top bodyguards, and it was their duty to protect their employers, and now that something happened to their employers, their careers would be over. Who dares to have a group of bodyguards who can't protect their employers? "Head, what should I do?" a bodyguard asked. The leading bodyguard was silent for a long time and finally sighed helplessly, "Call the police." Soon, the U.S. police arrived, sealed off the villa, and traced the scene. On the other side, Tony, who left the villa, walked directly towards Stark Industries. On the way, he contacted Potts and asked her to hold a shareholder meeting. The share exchange must be notified to other shareholders to take effect. At the same time, Tony also wants to take this opportunity to see if he can drive all shareholders out of the group and privatize Stark. Of course, this idea is not urgent, just an idea. Stark Industries shares, Tony holds 70.00%, 20.00%, Obalia holds. The remaining 5.00% will be shared by 3 small shareholders, and the remaining will be circulated in the stock market. Now that he has obtained Obalia's shares, Tony's shares have reached 90.00%. 5. Absolute control. It doesn't matter whether the remaining shares are collected or not. It's just that Tony prefers the number 90.00% to 5. Soon, Tony came to Stark Industries and took a private elevator into his office. This is his exclusive elevator, and no one else has the right to ride it except him. Sitting on the office chair, Tony called Potts. As the office door was pushed open, Tony looked at the door subconsciously. I saw Potts wearing a black suit with a white shirt inside. The slender legs were wrapped in a pair of black stockings, and the black high heels made a thumping sound when walking, which made Tony take a few extra glances. Fortunately, he still remembered the business, and quickly withdrew his gaze and said, "Has the news of my return spread?" "Not yet, I'm planning to arrange a press conference tomorrow," Potts said a little strangely. "Well, I'll give you a task to acquire the shares of those shareholders and repurchase the shares. This, I'm afraid it will be difficult. Obadiah will not give us this opportunity. He already knew about your return." Potts frowned. Hearing this, a smile suddenly appeared on Tony's face, and he pushed the contract out. "Look at this." Potts subconsciously picked up the contract on the table, and after seeing the contents clearly, a look of shock appeared on her face. "How is this possible? How did you do it?" Potts looked at Tony in shock, his eyes full of disbelief. "Obadiah actually transferred the shares to Tony. How is this possible?" Seeing her unbelievable expression, the smile on Tony's face remained the same, and he said, "In short, Obadiah won't be an obstacle. Let's do it." "It is good," Potts responded, and the expression on his face quickly returned to calm. No matter how Tony got it, she just needs to get rid of the remaining minority shareholders. Soon, Potts left the office and headed for the conference room. The conference room was on the same floor as Tony's office, and soon Tony, who was sitting in the office, heard a roar coming from outside the door. Apparently those few small shareholders couldn't sit still when they heard that they were going to repurchase their shares. But Tony didn't pay attention to it, leaving professional matters to professional people, and in business, Potts is undoubtedly professional. "I believe she will take care of everything." At this moment, the system's cold voice suddenly sounded. "Ding, the mission is released. Main quest: form a dark alliance. Task content: recruit enough capable people, form a dark alliance, and spread darkness to the world. Task reward: successfully recruit one person, reward a lucky draw, and part of the Shadow Corps." Looking at the system panel that suddenly appeared in front of him, Tony's eyes froze for a moment, and then the corner of his mouth twitched. Although he had known for a long time that his system was not a good thing, he did not expect it to be a villain system. "I'm the famous Iron Man, the leader of the Justice League. Although there was an accident and I can no longer transform into Iron Man, but I am still a very good person, and now I let myself spread darkness to the world. Am I that kind of person?" Glancing at the corner of his mouth, Tony's voice suddenly sounded. "Jarvis, sir, I am here. Help me check if anything strange has happened in New York City recently." Inquired, "Sir, and nothing strange happened." "Okay." Tony smacked his lips in disappointment. Although he is a good person, but the system gives too much. No matter the lottery or the Shadow Corps or good things. It's a pity that none of those superheroes showed up, and I have nowhere to recruit them. No, why did I spend so much time looking for it? Not only did it take time and effort, but it also delayed me from picking up girls. They should be allowed to take the initiative to find themselves. Whoever annoys superheroes the most is naturally the villain. These people are experienced babies of superheroes. If they master a villain-armed force, then superheroes will have to come to their door continuously. As the saying goes, there are always more solutions than difficulties. Once this idea was opened, Tony's thoughts suddenly became extremely clear. Finding a superhero is like fishing. It is the most perfect way to put down the bait and wait for the fish to take the bait quietly. But before that, he needs a bait. Moreover, the bait should not be too weak. After all, it is troublesome to change the bait every day. Thinking of this, the limited Marvel knowledge in Tony's mind suddenly came to mind. Who are the famous villains in Marvel? A Thanos, a Jin Bin. These two are the only ones he can remember, which are more representative. Needless to say, the old man Thanos, at this time, he may not be able to tell which planet he is nesting in and thinking about family planning. Therefore, there is only one candidate left for Tony, Jin Bing. Among the many characters in Marvel, Iron Man is the most similar to King. One stands shoulder to shoulder with gods with mortal power, and the other fights against a group of superheroes with mortal power. But from this point of view, both of them belong to the category of Renji and Tianzhou. Moreover, Jin Bing's power is huge, his business spreads all over the United States, and he is known as the Underground Emperor of Niuyu. Even a superhero likes to trouble him, so it is undoubtedly an excellent bait. No, it should be a partner. With gold and attention, you can keep fishing. At that time, forming the Dark Alliance will not be a piece of cake. Thinking of this, Tony suddenly smiled. Just when he was thinking about how to get a deposit and reach a cooperation with him. In the conference room on the other side, Potts also successfully won the shares held by those small shareholders at the cost of million rice. Regardless of the appearance of a lot of money, at the peak of Stark Industries, the shares held by each of them were worth 10 figures. The million Mijin won the shares in their hands, which is simply the price of cabbage. So far, the shares in Tony's hands have also increased to 90.00%, leaving only 10% of the shares in circulation in the market. Looking at Tony, who has just returned and has the entire group in his hands, Potts' eyes flashed a trace of complexity. What to do next? The entire group now has only your voice. Delisting. Take back the remaining 2%. Tony said in a flat tone, but Potts' face changed instantly. You are crazy. Do you know the impact of delisting? Once you delist, your wealth may shrink by half in an instant. Potts couldn't help but said loudly. But Tony doesn't care. With the share repurchase at this point, delisting is already imperative. Even if the loss is huge, he still has to persevere. It's not that he has a grudge against Qian, but that the group will be supervised by the government and supervised by the public if it does not delist. After the delisting, although the losses were heavy, it also made Stark Industries a private kingdom completely, without looking at anyone's face. In order for Stark not to be exposed to the sun, he must be delisted. You don't need to worry about other things, you listen to me, you must delist. In addition, a fake news was released, saying that the group intends to shut down the weapons manufacturing. If Potts could tolerate everything before, she couldn't sit still when she said this. What? You want to turn off weapon manufacturing? This is the lifeblood of the group. Potts said loudly, obviously disapproving of Tony's decision. Tony rolled his eyes immediately, and said helplessly, it's all fake news, I just want you to announce it, and fool those stockholders, who said it will be closed. If it was the predecessor, he might have done this kind of operation. After all, that's what he did in the original book, but Tony is not stupid. You don't make things like weapons, but people do. It is said that there is an absolute demand in the market. Unless the world is united one day, weapons will always be needed. Since this is the case, why should I deceive myself and others, and give up the source of wealth to others in vain? After listening to the explanation, Potts breathed a sigh of relief. Even his previous decision to delist was not important anymore. As long as the weapon manufacturing is not shut down, it will be delisted if it is delisted. Thinking with some headaches, Potts left Tony's office again, not daring to stay any longer. Otherwise, God knows what shocking remarks Tony will make. She moved very quickly, and within a few hours, the false news that Stark Industries was about to shut down weapon manufacturing spread widely. The stock, which was already fluctuating because of Tony's disappearance, suddenly fell like a dive. In the U.S. stock market, following the news from Stark Industries, everyone began to sell their stocks, and more people even cursed at Tony. They could never have imagined that the high-quality stocks a few days ago had fallen like this. In order to stop the loss, they have no choice but to sell. And just as they were selling, Potts had organized a team to take in all the stocks they sold. However, this is destined to be a big project, and it cannot be completed in a day or two. So after ordering the matter down, Tony ignored the mess and asked Jarvis to find some information about Jin Bin and start researching it. Jin Bing was born in the slums of Hell's Kitchen, but because he dared to fight hard on the road, he quickly took a high-level position. Later, changes occurred in Hell's Kitchen, and Jin Bing's power also declined. However, the ambitious he swallowed his old club directly and rose completely. From this point alone, we can see the danger of Jin Bing. Cooperating with such a person is undoubtedly seeking skin from a tiger. If there is no system, Tony doesn't want to have too much contact with such people. But now he is naturally not afraid of a Jin Bing. After researching some information, Jarvis was asked to find out Jin Bing's contact information. As the top artificial intelligence of this era, wherever there is a network and a signal, it is Jarvis territory. Even though Jin Bing's mobile phone number is hidden, it took Jarvis 30 seconds to dig it out. Doodle. The phone rang, and soon after it was connected, a dull and majestic voice came out of the phone. Hey, hello, let me introduce myself. My name is Tony, the head of Stark Industries, you should know me. I have a business I want to talk to you about. I wonder if Mr. Jin Bing has time. Without any tact, Tony got straight to the point after the call was connected. Whether he was watching movies or novels in his previous life, what he hated the most was that the dialogue between the protagonist and the supporting role would never get to the point. Therefore, he naturally would not make this mistake. On the other end of the phone, after Tony's voice fell, the other side suddenly fell silent. Obviously, Tony's directness made Jin a little unresponsive. But Shang is Shang. In just a few seconds, he has come to his senses and thought about Tony's purpose. The Stark supply industry is a product of the sun. No matter how cruel it is in its bones, it is legal. But Jin is just the opposite. Whether his business or power is illegal, he is destined to be hidden in the dark. With such two forces, he really couldn't find a place to cooperate. Oh, Stark, interesting, how do you want to cooperate? Jin Bing asked curiously, but Tony didn't answer the question directly, but said with a smile on the corner of his mouth, since you are also interested, Mr. Jin Bing, why don't we meet and chat? After the words fell, there was another silence on the other end of the phone. Tony was not in a hurry, and quietly waited for a response. 10 seconds later, Jin Bing's steady voice sounded again, okay, let's meet and chat. I'll wait for you on Queen's Road. After finishing speaking, there was a beeping sound from the phone, and Jin Bing hung up the phone directly. And Tony also got up at this moment, and walked towards the door. The smile on his face disappeared instantly, and his expression became extremely dull. Taking the exclusive elevator to the third floor, Tony got on the supercar and started the vehicle. With the roar of the sports car, a silver supercar rushed out of the parking lot. Queen's Road. When Tony came here, he turned off the engine and got out of the car, lit a cigarette and smoked. When the cigarette was half burned, a strong man in a black suit walked directly towards him. Mr. Tony. Hello, Mr. Wilson asked me to pick you up. Let's go then, Tony said directly, flicking the cigarette in his hand. It drew an arc in midair and landed in the middle of the road. Immediately, the two got into a black car one after the other, and the strong man in the car took out a black sermon. Sorry, Mr. Tony, please cooperate with me. Seeing this, Tony nodded, expressing his understanding, and let the strong man put the black cloth on his face. He lost his vision, but Tony didn't panic. In the darkness that ordinary people couldn't see, pairs of scarlet eyes were staring at everyone in the car. But in case of any accident, they can be guaranteed to be shredded as soon as possible. 20 minutes later, Tony walked into a house under the guidance of the strong man, and at the same time untied the black cloth for him. Darkness and light intertwine. Tony squinted his eyes subconsciously, looking at the surrounding environment. This is an ordinary courtyard, ignoring the men in black standing guard around it. It is no different from the residence of ordinary people. In the middle of the lawn, a giant was sitting on the lawn in casual clothes. There was a barbecue grill in front of him, and the steaks were sizzling continuously. Looking at the figure like a hill, Tony's eyes flashed with surprise. Although he knew that Jin was very burly, he didn't expect it to be so burly. He was about 2 meters tall by visual inspection, and his whole body was full of muscles, especially his arms, which were thicker than ordinary people's thighs. The guy next to me was considered very strong among ordinary people, but in front of Jin Bing, it was like a child and an adult, with a huge gap. The thoughts in my mind turned back and forth, and the outside time only passed one breath, and Tony immediately raised his legs and walked over. As he approached, Jin Bin immediately looked up at him, gave him a deep look with his deep eyes, and then said in a flat tone, "Here you come. Let's eat something first." Facing the invitation, Tony nodded without any stage fright. "Okay, I just happen to be hungry, so cook it well, I don't want to eat raw." Hearing this, the corner of Jin Bing's mouth twitched. Since he annexed all the forces in Hell's Kitchen, this was the first time anyone dared to say such a thing in front of him. In response, Jin Bing continued to flip and grill the steak. Neither of them mentioned the cooperation, as if they had completely forgotten about it. Pieces of beef came out of the oven, and Tony ate them unceremoniously. He even opened a bottle of red wine halfway through, full of taste, and those who didn't know thought he was here for a picnic. An hour later, Tony and Jin wiped out all the ingredients, and several men in black stepped forward to remove the grill, while Tony sat lazily on the recliner. And Jin Bing's voice also sounded at this moment, "Tell me, how do you want to cooperate?" Hearing this, Tony glanced at him and complained, "I thought, how long can you hold it?" Jin Bing's face remained unchanged, and he didn't care about Tony's teasing. Seeing this, Tony immediately lost interest in teasing him, and said, "I sell arms, so we naturally have a basis for cooperation. I'll provide you with weapons, how about you do something for me?" While Tony was talking, he watched Jin Bin's reaction, but Jin Bin's performance was very flat. "Weapons, I can get them myself. I don't have to cooperate with you. If it's just like this, you won't be able to impress me." Jin Bin looked at Tony and shook his head to express that he was not satisfied with this condition. Tony raised an eyebrow immediately. "Is it? You can also get the military's new weapons. Can you get rockets, tanks, and missiles? Can you also get top-notch equipment from military laboratories?" Tony asked a series of questions, and Jin Bing's original calm expression suddenly changed. "What do you want to do?" He thought that Tony wanted to use conventional weapons to cooperate with him, and he was not a rebel, so the need for weapons was not so great. However, judging from Tony's tone, he planned to provide himself with some sophisticated weapons. These things are strictly prohibited and blocked by the military. No matter how powerful he is, he can't get them without special channels. Therefore, he, who originally acted indifferent, finally couldn't help but become serious at this moment. Seeing his reaction, Tony also smiled, shook his head and said, "I will provide you with weapons, and you will be responsible for providing me with information about some people. Of course, if you can send these people to me directly, I don't mind." "Who?" Jin Bing asked. "Some people with special abilities. You will often deal with these people in the future, and you will know when the time comes." Tony didn't say it clearly, but he believed that when Kim met those people, he would understand what he meant. And Jin didn't continue to ask, but fell into deep thought. Tony's conditions were very simple to him, even a bit too simple. If it were other conditions, Jin would not necessarily choose to cooperate. Who knows if Tony has any bigger plans? But the channels for high-end weapons were so rare that he was completely reluctant to give up, so after thinking twice, he finally agreed to cooperate. As for using other means to force Tony, it's not that Jin didn't think about it, but he quickly abandoned this idea. Stark Industries is a giant in the military industry, and its influence in the United States is too great. If he touches Tony, he will really have no place in the United States in the future. It is simply unrealistic to force Tony to cooperate by other means. As Jin Bing let go, the two officially reached a cooperation, and Tony didn't stay too long, and left directly. Now that the bait has been laid, and now he is waiting for those superheroes to take the bait, he can finally enjoy life without running around. That night, Tony gathered a large number of actresses who came to the house to attend the party and started his rich life. And while Tony was enjoying his life, on the other side, Alexander, in a certain Homeland Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency, Pierce is studying Tony's information. It contains information about Tony's sudden return after his disappearance, as well as information about Obalia's strange death. Either of these two incidents was full of mystery, which aroused Pierce's interest. At this moment, there was a knock on the door of the office, and a beautiful woman walked in. With long wavy hair and a black leather jacket, she is alluring and charming. "Director, are you looking for me?" the woman asked. Pierce replied immediately. Natasha, you came just in time. There is something you need to investigate. This is the target's information. After speaking, he pushed the information on the desktop to Natasha. Natasha quickly lowered her head to check, and the office fell into silence for a while. Soon, Natasha finished reading the information, and a strange flash of light flashed in her eyes. Tony Stark, what did this dude do that he asked us to investigate? As a person who often makes headlines in entertainment, it's hard for Natasha not to know her. It was precisely because of this that she felt strange. Just a playboy, although he is very rich, he is not worthy of their attention. Facing Natasha's confusion, Pierce didn't talk nonsense, and directly handed her the information in his hand. This playboy was really not worth noting before, but not necessarily now. He disappeared in the desert not long ago, and before he was rescued, he returned by himself. After his return, Obadiah, the number 2 figure in Stark Industries, disappeared. FBL has already inspected the scene, and nothing was found except for the blood left behind. Moreover, on the day Obadiah disappeared, the shares of Stark Industries Group changed. Tony has acquired the shares of other shareholders, including Obadiah's shares, and now he already holds 90.00% of the shares of Stark Industries. Natasha looked at the information, while Pierce continued to explain. So, I have reason to suspect that the disappearance of Obadiah has an inseparable relationship with Tony. It may even involve some kind of mysterious force. So, your task is very simple: approach him, find out his details, or the power behind him. After the words fell, Pierce quietly waited for Natasha's response. After a while, Natasha finally said after reading the information, I understand, leave this task to me. Soon, Natasha left the office, and Pierce took out his phone at this moment and dialed a number. I have asked someone to start an investigation. You should monitor him closely. Once there is a result, you will arrest him. Yes, the person on the other end of the phone answered, and Pierce hung up the phone directly. After doing all this, his eyes fell on Tony's photo, which looked a little deep. While all parties were taking action, a young man wearing glasses was lying on the ground with a grim expression in a residential house in Brooklyn, twitching constantly. His name is Peter. Parker, a college student, was accidentally bitten by a spider when he went to the biology museum to participate in the exhibition, and he became like this after returning home, and no one knows about all this at the moment. The night passed quickly, and when the sun rose the next day, Tony woke up from the beauties. Looking at the mess on the bed, Tony stretched his waist with a satisfied face. Walking downstairs in pajamas, Potts was sitting on the sofa in the living room with an indifferent face. When Tony, who had just come downstairs, saw this scene, a trace of embarrassment flashed across his face, but it was gone in a blink of an eye. Hey, Potts, why are you here? Hearing this, Potts glanced at Tony in pajamas, and said indifferently, the stock purchase is almost done. Let me ask, when do you plan to hold a press conference to inform the outside world of your return? Also, the people from the tax bureau invited you to drink tea and want to talk to you about delisting. When speaking, Potts' tone was full of resentment. I have worked so hard for this fool, but this fool is enjoying himself here, how angry. Looking at Potts with a displeased face, Tony coughed lightly and said, I'm gone from the tax bureau. I'm delisting. It's none of their business. Let them do what they should do. For the press conference, hold it in the afternoon. Since the matter has been settled, there is no need to hide it. By the way, you will help me clean up the garbage upstairs later. After finishing speaking, Tony walked into the bathroom to wash up, while Potts looked at his back and gritted his teeth and cursed. Asshole. After cursing, she had no choice but to walk upstairs with helplessness, and soon, several ladies were kicked out of the villa by her. Had breakfast with Tony, and the two went to the company together. As the person in charge of the company, although Tony left most of the things to Potts, some documents still need to be signed by him to take effect. Combined with the time he's been missing, the company has amassed a mountain of documents waiting to be processed. So, for the next few days, Tony was tied up in the company, working hard like a cow. But during the few days when Tony was working hard, a big event happened in Niuyo. A guy named Spider-Man was born to fight crime in Niuyo. For a while, everyone in Niuyo City was discussing this Spider-Man who came out of nowhere. Some people think that he is the patron saint of Niayu, and some people think that although this guy fights crimes, he is no different from those criminals who use violence to control violence. As for the attitude of the Niayu police, the appearance of this guy is like slapping them in the face. They are the enforcers and guardians of Niayu, so the arrest warrant was issued directly. But if you want to say that the most annoying to Spider-Man, it is probably Jin Bin. As the emperor who controlled 80.00% of the underground transactions in Niuyo City, Spider-Man attacked all his businesses. Because of Spider-Man, he lost tens of millions of meters gold during this time. Naturally, this little money is not in his eyes, but he cannot allow anyone to challenge his majesty. In a building, Jin Bing sat on an office chair with a calm expression on his face. In front of him, the burly man in a suit who received Tony before was standing there with a solemn expression on his face. He is Jin Bing's confidant Daniel. Brown is in charge of various businesses in Niayu City. How is the investigation? Has the guy's identity been found out? Jin Bing couldn't hear the sound of joy and anger, and Daniel couldn't help feeling a chill in his heart. The calmer Jin Bing was, the angrier he was. Mr. Wilson, sorry, I have not found out his specific identity. That guy moves too fast, we can't keep up with him, and every time he appears without warning, I mobilized most of the surveillance in Niuyo City, but I couldn't find his figure before the disguise. After finishing speaking, Daniel lowered his head in panic, for fear that Jin Bin would get angry and implicate himself. Fortunately, Jin didn't get angry, but turned his head to look out the French window, and muttered to himself, "Is this the person you're looking for?" After finishing speaking, Jin He picked up his mobile phone and dialed Tony's number. Stark Industries building. Tony, who was busy, heard the phone ring. "Jarvis, come in." "Okay, sir." In the next second, Jin Bing's voice sounded in the office. "I think the person you were looking for has appeared." Hearing this, Tony stopped reviewing the documents. "So fast. Where is he?" "Do not know." Jin took it for granted, and the corner of Tony's mouth twitched. "Then what's his name?" "Spider-Man." Hearing this name, Tony frowned, but there was not much surprise in his eyes. He didn't know the order of appearance of superheroes, but because of Niyoshi, he always felt that this little spider should be the first thing he came into contact with. He also tried to find his whereabouts, but the girl was too big, with tens of millions of permanent residents, and trying to find someone by a name, even if he controlled Stark Industries, was still a needle in a haystack. At this time, Jin Bin's voice sounded again. "What are you going to do?" Hearing this, the corner of Tony's mouth twitched. "It's very simple, you arrange someone to conduct illegal transactions. Lure him out. Leave the rest to me to solve." "Okay, then tonight, I'll arrange a deal in Manhattan, where he often hangs out." Jin Bin responded directly, and then hung up the phone. Tony also put down the documents in his hands at this moment, got up and walked to the French windows, looking at all the living beings outside the window. His eyes were shining brightly. The former superhero finally degenerated into a dark villain. It should be very interesting. Speaking, Tony couldn't help laughing. At this moment, there was a knock on the door, and a figure of Manly walked in. She is Tony's new secretary, Natasha. As for Potts, he is now the CEO of Stark Industries, so he no longer serves as secretary. Originally, according to Potts' intention, Tony was going to arrange a male secretary. But this decision was firmly opposed by Tony, so Natasha succeeded in taking the position by virtue of her own conditions. "Mr. Tony, this is the document Miss Potts asked me to send, and you need to sign it." Natasha wore a pair of glasses, and she exuded an intellectual temperament, which was very attractive. But Tony, who was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, didn't even look at her. He just waved his hand and said, "Put it down." Seeing this, Natasha could only put down the document, and looked at Tony's back with a puzzled expression. The script wasn't right as she imagined. Isn't this guy a playboy? I have been working for several days, why don't I see this guy hooking me up? Is it because you are not beautiful and charming enough? Impossible. Natasha decisively rejected this possibility. Then, looking at Tony's back, he hesitated for a moment and stepped forward to put his hand on Tony's shoulder. "Mr. Tony, are you tired? I have learned Wagwo's massage, which can relieve fatigue. Do you want to try it?" As she spoke, Natasha started massaging Tony's shoulders with her tender hands. At this moment, the distance between the two bodies is no more than 1 centimeter, and Tony can even smell the fragrance from her body, which can stimulate the desire deep in the heart. Suddenly, Tony turned to look at Natasha, and Natasha's big eyes couldn't help exuding a seductive look. I don't know if the neckline on the chest is intentional or not, just enough to clearly see the scenery inside. But the scene she imagined did not appear, and Tony frowned directly. "What are you doing?" Hearing this, Natasha's expression froze, and she didn't know how to answer. "Isn't it obvious enough?" And Tony continued. "Find out your identity, work hard, stop messing with these messy things, get out, right now, right now." "Oh, yes, Mr. Tony." Natasha responded in a panic, and walked out of the office. After going out, her mind was still buzzing. "Are you disgusted by yourself?" In the office, Tony looked at Natasha's leaving back, and the corner of his mouth curled up. When he saw Natasha, he already recognized her identity. After all, as a beauty in Marvel, Black Widow is still very well known. It was precisely because of this that he would act like that. Otherwise, how can a cat not eat fish, and a man not steal fish? It's just because the fish has spines, so you need to remove the spines before you can bite. Ignoring Natasha's affairs, he started to process the documents again. Time passed quickly in his busy schedule, and soon night fell. Tony drove away from the Stark Industrial Building and came to 13th Avenue in Manhattan. This is the trading place chosen by Jin Bin. With few pedestrians, it is suitable for trading. Parking the car on the side of the road, Tony turned off the engine and sat in the car. Soon, 2 black cars stopped on the road. The 2 gangs traded according to the normal process. Time passed little by little, and the transaction came to an end soon. Just when the 2 parties were about to conclude the transaction, a young voice suddenly came from the alley beside the road. "Good evening, gentlemen. What are you doing? Need help?" The sudden sound startled everyone, and their expressions changed immediately. "Fact, Spider-Man, shoot and shoot," a ringleader yelled, and both sides of the deal fired simultaneously. All of a sudden, gunfire erupted in the darkness. Countless bullets poured directly towards Spider-Man, and Spider-Man, who was hanging upside down at the entrance of the alley just now, disappeared in place the moment the gunshot sounded. I saw him jumping and appearing directly in front of the crowd. The spider webs on his wrist shot out continuously like bullets, knocking everyone to the ground one after another. It took only a few breaths before and after, the battle was over, and the 2 parties in the transaction were directly captured by him. "Gentlemen, it seems that you need my help to make a call to the police." Spider-Man looked at the items traded between the 2 parties, leaned over and took out a phone from a member, planning to call the police. But at this moment, his movements stopped instantly, and he looked around sharply. Boom, boom, boom. There was a sound of smoke exploding, and black figures appeared around him. These people were wrapped in black ninja clothes, and their eyes were filled with scarlet light. They were the Black Shadow Ninja Legion. Looking at these people, a hint of shock flashed in Peter's eyes under the mask. With his super spider sense, he clearly sensed that these people appeared beside him out of thin air. In other words, they are not human at all. Immediately, Peter became vigilant, looked at the many Black Shadow ninjas and asked, "Hey, buddy, who are you?" After the words fell, the Black Shadow ninja naturally would not answer his question, and the sound of long swords being unsheathed sounded in the darkness. In the next second, many shadow ninjas rushed towards Peter silently, and Peter's heart skipped a beat. However, at this moment, he didn't have time to think about anything else. The spider silk on his wrist was launched quickly, rushing towards the Black Shadow ninja at a speed comparable to a bullet. However, the shadow ninjas are not those useless wood, they either dodge or chop, quickly escaped the attack of the spider silk, and came to Peter's side. In an instant, the sound of the samurai sword piercing the air sounded, and it went straight to Peter's vitals with a howl, causing Peter's eyelids to twitch, and he quickly jumped to dodge and avoid the attack. His speed is so fast that ordinary people can't keep up with him, but the Black Shadow ninja is obviously not an ordinary person. As Peter dodged, many Black Shadow ninjas quickly followed, and the cross dart flew out of their hands, directly scratching Peter's spider clothes. Peter, who originally wanted to keep his hand, watched this scene, but he couldn't care less about keeping his hand anymore, and quickly started to fight back. After mutation, his strength and speed have already reached a terrifying level, and his strength is enough to stop a train. Although the Black Shadow Ninja is powerful, its individual strength is not enough to compete with it. Therefore, after Peter shot with all his strength, many Shadow Ninjas were directly beaten and scattered. However, looking at this scene, Peter didn't have any joy on his face, instead his expression became more and more ugly. Because, he found that the number of Shadow Ninjas is increasing. After he killed more than a dozen Black Shadow Ninjas, the number of Black Shadow Ninjas has surged to hundreds. There were even Shadow Ninjas popping up one after another in the periphery. Although he is powerful, he is still in danger under the siege of so many Black Shadow Ninjas. At this moment, the spider battle suit on his body has become tattered, and bloody mouths appeared on his body. As time passed, his physical strength continued to be exhausted, and he began to be out of breath. Sensing the danger, he didn't dare to stay where he was any longer. Spider threads shot out from his wrists, and he quickly flew into the air and left the place. Freed from the siege of the Shadow Ninjas, Peter finally breathed a sigh of relief. But just when he thought it was safe, a terrifying scene suddenly appeared in front of his eyes. On the tall buildings in front of him, a Black Shadow Ninja with scarlet eyes kept appearing, looking at his figure. Seeing this, Peter's face froze, and a fear rose from his heart. Just now, hundreds of Black Shadow Ninjas have made him dangerous. Now, there are more than hundreds of Black Shadow Ninjas. Although he didn't know the exact number, but at a glance, there were no less than 1,000 people. If surrounded by these people, Peter is not sure if he will survive. At the moment he didn't dare to stay any longer, his figure was rippling among the tall buildings, and quickly disappeared here. And when he was advancing rapidly, some Black Shadow Ninjas chased him directly, although they couldn't use the spider silk to wave in the air like Peter. But relying on his terrifying jumping ability, he can shuttle over tall buildings at a speed no slower than Peter. This made Peter, who wanted to throw them away, helpless. Soon, something that made Peter even more desperate happened. On his way forward, a Shadow Ninja jumped directly from a tall building and rushed towards him. Dense cross marks roared towards him, followed by the Shadow Ninja holding a samurai sword. Although he dodged most of the attacks by virtue of his super spider sense and agility, some attacks still landed on him. On his body, blood flowers continued to bloom, causing a series of muffled groans from his mouth. At the same time, a cross scratched the spider silk in his hand, and the spider thread broke immediately, and Peter's body that had been flying in the air fell directly to the ground. The sudden change scared Peter to death. The spider silk on his wrist couldn't help shooting wildly, decelerating constantly, and finally his body fell heavily into an alley, making him out of breath for a long time. And in the darkness, the Shadow Ninja's figure kept appearing, surrounding him tightly. At this moment, he really has no way to go to heaven and no way to go to earth. Fear hit his heart. Peter looked at the Shadow Ninjas around him, and swallowed subconsciously. He became Spider-Man in just a few days. Before that, he was just an ordinary person, and he was often bullied by the campus. From the bottom of his heart, his character is relatively cowardly, but it is only because of his powerful strength that he is full of self-confidence. But now, the strength he relied on has lost its effect, and the cowardly nature in his bones has once again gained the upper hand. "What do you want to do? Don't come here." A roar suppressing fear came out of his mouth, and the Shadow Ninja who had been approaching suddenly stopped after his voice fell. Peter was taken aback by this scene, and even a little overwhelmed. But soon, the sound of footsteps in the darkness woke him up, making him realize that it wasn't his words that had an effect, but the real master behind him had appeared. Immediately, his eyes couldn't help passing through the Shadow Ninjas, looking towards the entrance of the alley, and a figure entered his eyes. The visitor was dressed in a suit, exuding a lazy temperament, and the smile on the corner of his mouth gave people a feeling that he was in control. As he approached, the Black Shadow Ninjas gave way one after another, and bowed their heads in salute, just like saluting the king, saluting the coming people. Looking at this scene, the fear in his heart magnified again, and his eyes fixed on the person coming. "Good evening, our Spider-Man, let me introduce myself, my name is Tony Stark." Tony came up to Peter, looked down at him and said. After seeing Tony's face, Peter's mind was shaken crazily, and a look of disbelief appeared in his eyes. "Tony, Stark, the famous playboy, the after-dinner joke of the townspeople. I don't know how many tabloids and entertainment reporters have been supported by his news. Peter has also admired many of his glorious deeds, and even envied him, wanting to work for the Stark group. He didn't expect that the two would meet in such a scene, let alone that the famous playboy was secretly so terrifying. For a moment, the whole person forgot to speak. It seems that our Spider-Man recognized my identity, Tony said with a smile on the corner of his mouth. Peter shuddered instantly, and various conspiracy theories rushed into his mind. According to the movie routine, if I knew his identity, wouldn't I be finished? Thinking of this, Peter quickly said, Mr. Tony, I have something to talk about. I don't know what you want from me. If I can help, I will definitely help. Snapped. Happy, I like talking to straightforward people. Tony snapped his fingers. Actually, it's not a big deal, but I need you to help me kill someone. What do you think? Tony looked at Peter with a smile, and the corners of Peter's mouth twitched as he was patting his chest just now. Although he has mastered powerful power, so far, he has not killed anyone. Because of his uncle's death, he has always practiced the saying that with great power comes great responsibility, and he strives to be a good person. Tony's request undoubtedly created a problem for him. For a moment, he couldn't help making a bitter face, and said cautiously, Sir, can you change your request? No matter what the matter is, it doesn't have to be solved by killing people. You are not qualified to bargain. You only have two choices now. Either you die or someone else dies. You choose. Tony interrupted him, speaking in a casual tone. Human life seemed so contemptuous in his mouth. Seeing this, Peter knew that he had no choice, and his face could not help but become cloudy. Killing someone violated his principles, and if he didn't kill, his life would be in danger. If he continued to practice his principles according to the original track, then he would rather die today than kill innocent people. But there are no ifs in the world. He has only been Spider-Man for a few days, and he has not completely transformed from a small townsman into a superhero. He cared more about his own life than the lives of others. Therefore, after hesitating for a while, Peter finally said, Who does the master want me to kill? After the words fell, the smile on the corner of Tony's mouth became even brighter. Ivan Vanki. Look back, I will give you his information, all you have to do is to solve him. Is there a problem? Peter silently shook his head. Then put this bracelet on. Tony threw a bracelet to Peter casually, and Peter caught it subconsciously. This is a communicator, I will contact you through him, and I will also transfer the information to this bracelet. Also, don't think about not completing the task, this bracelet will explode. That's it, I'll go first. After speaking, Tony watched Peter put on the bracelet, then turned and left the alley with a smile. As he left, the surrounding shadow ninjas also melted into the darkness and disappeared, leaving only the decadent Peter in the alley. Outside the alley, on the silver-white sports car, Jarvis's voice sounded as soon as Tony got into the car. Sir, you have changed a lot. Hearing this, Tony's expression remained unchanged. After all, he was not his predecessor, and Jarvis would definitely notice something when he was with him day and night. Really, then do you think my changes are good or bad? Tony asked back. Jarvis's flat voice continued, I'm just an artificial intelligence. I can't judge whether a person is good or bad, let alone you, sir. However, I like you better now. Thank you for the affirmation. It seems that your intelligence has improved again. Tony praised, and at the same time started the vehicle and left the place. Sir, can I ask, Ivan, who is Vanki? In my database, it seems that Sir has no contact with this person. A person who will die later, I just moved his death time a little earlier. Tony replied with a smile, but a faint light flashed in his eyes. He inherited Stark's identity, and he also inherited his causality, although he did not develop the iron suit. But those guys who have hatred against him will find him sooner or later. Adhering to the idea of attacking first and suffering later, Tony is more willing to nip trouble in the bud. And Ivan Vanki is obviously such a troublesome figure. However, the appearance of Natasha let him know that he was being targeted by the shield, and it was not suitable for him to take too many actions in the short term. It just so happened that the appearance of Peter gave him a candidate to solve the trouble, so he was able to kill Ivan Vanki's mission. Not only can it solve the trouble, but it can also use this incident to make the little spider go on the road of blackening. After all, the reason why superheroes are heroes is because they all have their own principles, and the principle of Little Spider is obviously to save innocent people. And when the principle is broken, the hero is no longer a hero. Chapter 11. Nothing happened overnight, and the next day, Tony came to the company as usual, ignoring Natasha, who was posing and reviewing the documents as usual. After spending 2 hours, he finally finished processing all the documents that required his signature, and he couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Whoever said being a boss is comfortable, stand up and beat him to death. Tony roughly calculated in the past few days, and the documents he reviewed have reached more than 100 caddies. These are all paper documents, not the bamboo slips of the ancient past. From this, it can be seen how many things he has to deal with in a day. For a moment, he suddenly regretted killing Obadiah. Because of this guy who managed the company in his predecessor, he was able to spend a lot of time and be a shopkeeper. Now, after Obadiah is killed, most of the company's affairs can only be handled by himself, which is really annoying. Just when he was emptying his mind, suddenly the door of the office was pushed open. Potts came in from the door, and when he saw her, Tony felt dizzy. "Beautiful Ms. Potts, I think I need to rest for a while. I authorize you to handle the company's affairs. What do you think?" Potts couldn't help but rolled his eyes looking at Tony, who had already complained before he even opened his mouth. But she also knew that he was tired during this time, so she didn't continue to hit him. "Okay, I'll give you a vacation if I deal with one more thing, don't complain." "Really? What's the matter? Tell me." Tony suddenly became excited. He really doesn't want to stay in the office anymore, which is definitely good news for him. The military's procurement invitation for this year has been sent. It will start. Go and participate and try to win more orders. With that said, Potts handed an invitation letter to Tony, then hurriedly turned and left the office. As president, Potts had a busier business than Tony. After all, Tony only needs to deal with some important matters, but Potts has to manage the entire group. The workload between the two is not at the same level at all. Looking at her leaving back, Tony shook his head. How could this woman have such a great enthusiasm for work? Withdrawing his thoughts, Tony opened the invitation letter and looked at the content on it. Naturally, there was nothing substantive in the content. But Tony was curious, so he watched it with gusto. Military procurement is the main source of profit for major arms companies, and the annual procurement meeting is a gluttonous feast for major military companies. Everyone wants to eat one more bite in this feast, so the competition is fierce. Even in the past procurement meeting, you can still see the situation where the leaders of the major groups fight on the spot, which can be said to be very lively. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Tony left the group surrounded by a group of bodyguards, got into a Rolls-Royce, and rushed to the purchasing meeting site. When he arrived, it was close to 3 o'clock, and the procurement meeting was about to start. Hart followed behind him with 2 bodyguards and accompanied him into the venue, while the rest of the bodyguards stood by outside. After entering the venue, there was a burst of noise, and hundreds of people were talking loudly in the venue. Almost 80.00% of the arms dealers in the entire United States are gathered here. But after Tony walked in, everyone turned to look at him almost at the same time, with awe in their eyes. As a top military giant in the United States and even in the world, it is difficult for Tony to appear on the stage without attracting attention. Ignoring most of the people present, Tony came to the front row of the venue. Compared with the crowd at the back, there were only a few people in the front row of the venue, and behind these people stood a giant that was no weaker than Stark Industries. Hammer Industries, Justin Hammer, the helm of Hammer Industries, like Stark Industries, is mainly engaged in the arms business and has long-term cooperation with the Ministry of Defense. It is the main competitor of Stark Industries. PIM Tech, Hank. The group created by PIM specializes in the study of PIM particles that can change the size of objects. It also produces weapons, but the proportion is not important. Aoshi Group, a family-owned business, is at the helm of Norman Osborn, who focuses on biotechnology, has made great achievements in the military industry, and has a faint tendency to catch up with Hammer Industries. Pioneer Technology, the founder of Kirian, specializes in genetic modification engineering. He is not deeply involved in the arms industry, so he is basically here to make soy sauce. Roxxon Corporation, the overlord of the energy industry in the United States, started with the oil industry and is one of the largest conglomerates in the world, and has spread its tentacles to all walks of life. Hanmer Industries and Aoshi Group are all at the helm, while the rest of the companies are vice presidents. After all, this is a procurement fair for the military, and none of their main businesses are arms. Even if they can't compete with Stark Industries, Austrian Group, and Hammer Industries, the three military overlords. Therefore, it is enough to send a vice president to make soy sauce. Following Tony's arrival, the vice presidents of several groups nodded at him as a greeting. And Hammer raised his mouth and said, "Tony, I heard that you were almost planted in the desert and couldn't come back. I was ready to open champagne to celebrate. I didn't expect to see you again. I'm so disappointed." As the main competitors of Stark Industries, the grievances between the two can be said to have a long history. So Hammer was not polite at all. Hearing this, Tony sat in his seat and mocked, "Really, that really disappointed you? However, don't waste your champagne. I think you are about to lose your position as the second child of 10,000 years. When you fall to the third position, I will drink it for you." After speaking, Tony turned his head and glanced at Osborne, and nodded with a smile on his lips. And Osborne's face was a little ugly. It was originally a battle between Hammer Industries and Stark Industries, but in the end, Tony dragged the Austrian group into it with a single sentence. It's no wonder he has a good face. Sure enough, Hammer, who had been focusing on Tony, silently glanced at Osborne at this moment. In the past 2 years, the Austrian group's share in the military procurement meeting has been getting higher and higher, which has already threatened Hammer Industries. Originally planning to compete with Tony, he suddenly changed his strategy at this moment and decided to suppress the Austrian group first. Soon, the time came to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the military procurement meeting officially started. Under the auspices of the military procurement personnel, the major military enterprises present received orders one after another. Some people are happy because the orders are high, and some people are depressed because the orders are falling. But the one with the most explosive mood was Osborne. Stark Industries and Hammer Industries, who were in tit for tat in the past, have tacitly joined forces to suppress the Austrian group this year. Let the Austrian group only get the orders. This result almost made Osborne go berserk. At the same time, it also confirms an old saying in Wagwo, there are no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. When the military purchase meeting was over, Osborne walked out of the venue with a gloomy face. Looking at Hammer and Tony who had left, he wished he could swallow them alive. Originally, according to his plan, this year's procurement meeting, Aoshi Group can win at least 20.00% of the orders. But because of the joint suppression of the two, Aoshi Group only got half of the plan. This number is worse than in previous years. You must know that the annual military expenditure of the United States is as high as 4,000 billion yuan, and the profit of 1 point is hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars. Under the joint suppression of Tony and Hammer, the Austrian group lost 10 points or even more. The loss was as high as tens of billions of dollars. Such a huge loss is enough to make people crazy. What's more, the recent situation of Aoshi Group is not good. In order to win more military orders and catch up with Hammer Industries and Stark Industries, they specially developed military products such as flying skateboards, individual combat armor, and human body enhancers. A total billion yuan has been invested, and the company has suffered serious losses, and the major shareholders are extremely dissatisfied with this. Osborne is all counting on this year's military procurement to win more orders and appease shareholders. But now, everything is gone, and the thought of Osborne's heart bleeds. Taking a deep breath, he endured the pain in his heart and got in the car, returning to the company. At the same time, the specific news of the military procurement meeting was quickly disseminated through various channels. When Osborne returned to the company, his secretary hurried to his office. "Mr. Osborne, it's not good, all the shareholders are here, and we are waiting for you in the meeting room." Hearing this, Osborne's mood, which had finally stabilized, fluctuated violently again. "Who made them come?" Osborne said viciously. His ferocious expression frightened the female secretary, and even his tone became stammered. "Mr. Osborne, They came here by themselves. Well, it seems that they came here after receiving specific news from the procurement meeting, and their expressions are not very good. Hearing this, Osborne's heart sank, and the thing he was most worried about happened. You go down first. He casually dismissed the secretary, and the female secretary immediately left the office as if she had been pardoned. After he was left alone, the suppressed anger in his heart suddenly burst out. A sound of ping-pong-pong came from the office, and soon the office became a mess. After a long time, Osborne finally sorted out his emotions, left the office and walked towards the conference room. When he came to the door of the meeting room, Osborne pushed the door open and entered. Swish! In an instant, many shareholders in the conference room turned their heads to look at him at the same time, and the scene was extremely terrifying. Looking at the expressionless faces of everyone, Osborne tried his best to squeeze a smile on his face. Why are you all here? Hearing this, the shareholders who sat in the meeting room were not polite at all. Mr. Osborne, I heard that our group only one of the military purchase orders this year. Is it true? As soon as the shareholder opened his mouth, he directly stabbed Osborne in the heart. He wanted to refute, but he knew that it was useless. These people were not weak. They must have got the news, otherwise they would not have appeared here. At the moment, he could only nod his head with difficulty and said, "That's right. But that's because Stark Industries and Hammer Industries joined forces to suppress us. Otherwise, our purchase orders will definitely not be so small." Osborne tried his best to defend, but the shareholders present did not listen to these, they focused on their interests. Osborne's strong advocacy of researching individual equipment and human body strengthening agents had already made them dissatisfied. In addition, the research was stuck in a bottleneck and the best results could not be produced, which made their dissatisfaction reach the extreme. Now that the military orders have been reduced, the profits of the Austrian group have dropped sharply, and it has finally become the last straw that broke the camel's back. Let them choose to tear their skins. Mr. Osborne, you don't need to explain. We joined the Austrian group for profit. But now the Austrian group obviously cannot bring us profits. So many of our shareholders have unanimously decided to withdraw their capital from Aoshi Group. The cold words turned into the sharpest sword at this moment, stabbing fiercely into Osborne's heart. No, you can't do that. Osborne roared. Because of research and development, Aoshi Group has run out of funds. If the major shareholders withdraw their capital again, Aoshi Group will not rule out the possibility of bankruptcy. As the helm of the Austrian group, he does not allow such a thing to happen. Gentlemen, calm down. Aoshi Group is only temporarily in trouble. As long as you survive, Aoshi Group will become better and your interests will be guaranteed. Moreover, the Aoshi Group has also made a lot of profits for you these years. You have no losses at all. Now it's just not making money for a while. You can't just abandon the Aoshi Group like this. Osborne tried his best to save him, and even played the emotional card. But capital is cruel, and capitalists are even more ruthless. They only have interests in their eyes. As for feelings, how much is that thing per caddy? Therefore, no matter how Osborne tried to keep him, everyone present did not waver in the slightest. Mr. Osborne, don't waste your time, prepare the contract, we will sign it later. After finishing speaking, the major shareholders got up and left the conference room one after another, leaving only Osborne sitting in his seat in a daze. Without the appearance of Tony, it would have been a year later for the major shareholders of the Aoshi Group to withdraw their capital, but because of Tony's intervention, the Aoshi Group was pushed into the abyss of bankruptcy in advance. As time passed, Osborne sat in the meeting room for a long time, until it was getting late and the employees of the Aoshi Group got off work, and the female secretary came in cautiously. Mr. Osborne, it's time to go. After the words fell, Osborne woke up instantly with his blank eyes. He glanced at the female secretary with a flat face, and calmly said, "You go first, I will stay for a while." Hearing this, the female secretary nodded hesitantly, turned around and walked out the door. When she reached the door, she subconsciously turned around and glanced at Osborne, only to find that he was completely in the shadows. On the originally plain face, the corners of the mouth turned up at some point, giving people a strange feeling. Seeing this scene, the female secretary's heart skipped a beat, and she shuddered subconsciously, not daring to stay any longer, and hurriedly left the place. Soon, the staff of the Austrian group left off work one after another, leaving only Osborne in the entire Austrian group. Osborne, who was in the shadows, suddenly stood up and walked out of the conference room, walking towards the laboratory building of the Austrian group. Aoshi Group has a total of 33 floors, of which the 1st to 15th floors are office areas for ordinary employees. The 16th floor to the 25th floor belong to the laboratory building, specializing in the research and production of various new products. The research on individual armor and body enhancers is on the 20th floor. Although the research on individual weapons still cannot be mass-produced, there are already mature products in the research room. In contrast, human body enhancers are still semi-mature products that have undergone biological experiments, but have not yet been tested on humans. According to research, any creature injected with a human body enhancer will become irritable and full of destructive desires. Because this problem cannot be overcome, human experiments have not been carried out for a long time. Originally, according to Osborne's plan, the human body enhancer needs to be improved continuously to remove the side effects before it can act on the human body. But now, he can't wait any longer. Many shareholders are about to withdraw their capital. Only by producing better research results can he hope to persuade them to continue to support him and keep Aoshi Group. Therefore, he decided to use himself as a research subject for the next stage of human research. On the 20th floor, Osborne activated the equipment and stepped into the experimental cabin. As the experimental hatch closed, a burst of mist spewed out, and a hint of madness flashed in Osborne's eyes. With no way out, he must either succeed in researching the perfect body enhancer, or die in the experimental cabin. This is his last struggle. With the determination to die, the body enhancer poured into his body, and a tearing pain rushed into his mind, and a scream resounded through the floor. Liberty City, the seaside villa. Through Jarvis, Tony finally collected Ivan Vanki data. After getting the information, he directly sent the information to Peter, and dialed Peter's phone at the same time. "Hello, little spider, good evening. Have you received the information? I hope to see this person disappear tonight, and I hope you don't disappoint me." After speaking, without waiting for Peter to reply, Tony hung up the phone directly and asked Jarvis to call out Peter's scene. In addition to positioning, that bracelet can also monitor Peter's movements in real time. He is ready to enjoy a scene where a superhero falls. On the other side, Peter's residence. Looking at the hung-up phone, Peter looked at the data projected from his wrist in silence. After keeping all the information in his mind, Peter took out his spider suit from the closet. Looking at the battle clothes representing justice, Peter laughed at himself. He is determined to protect the public, but today, he wants to betray his principles and kill an innocent person with his own hands. "I don't want to either, I just want to live." Muttering something to himself, Peter put on the spider suit, jumped out of the window, and quickly left the house. With his figure rippling in the steel jungle, Peter quickly came to this time's destination, Hammer Industry. The target, Ivan, is the chief weapon designer of Hammer Industries. According to the information, he has been staying in Hammer Industries all year round. Therefore, to solve him, first find a way to sneak into Hammer Industries. As a top military industrial giant, Hammer Industries' security force is extremely strong. Even the world's top military king would never want to sneak in quietly. But this can only deal with some mortals. Although Peter's strength is not comparable to that of a god, it is also beyond the range of mortals. In front of him, the security force of Hammer Industry has become a complete joke. Just with the help of spider silk, Peter easily reached the top floor of Hammer Industry. With the help of the spider barb on his palm, he easily opened a hole in the glass on the top floor of the Hammer Industrial Building, enough for one person to pass through, and climbed in. Then he entered the elevator and went straight to the third floor of the Hammer Industrial Building. This is the Weapon Research and Development Office of Hammer Industries, and it is also where Ivan is located. In the villa, Tony sipped red wine, watched the whole process of Peter sneaking in on the video, and said with a smile, "It seems that our Spider-Man is even better than I imagined." Jarvis, according to his performance, construct a strength file, and try to deduce the direction of his strength improvement. "Okay sir, the recording has started," Jarvis responded. In the video, Peter has successfully arrived at the third floor of Hammer Industry. Ding! The elevator door opened slowly. A dozen black gun muzzles appeared in front of Peter's eyes, and the pupils of Peter's eyes shrank immediately, and his figure jumped up subconsciously, grabbing the top of the elevator. The next second, the gunfire erupted, and the bullets roared in an instant. The terrifying burning sensation left dark marks on his spider suit. Before he had time to think about it, he quickly shot out a spider web from his wrist, covering several people at the elevator door and interrupting their continued firing. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he also quickly left the narrow space of the elevator, using his speed to the extreme, knocking out several people at the elevator entrance in a few seconds. And the moment they fainted, a siren sounded throughout the institute, and with his strong hearing, Peter heard a burst of dense footsteps approaching quickly. For a moment, he couldn't help cursing, "Fake, how did they find out?" When he sneaked in, he was very careful and didn't make any movement, so he couldn't figure out where he was exposed. Peter was thinking irritably, but he didn't know that as a research and development office for new weapons, the security forces here were more than 3 times stricter than outside. There are people waiting at the elevator entrance 24 hours a day, and you can always see the scene in the elevator. Although he is powerful, but because he is a fledgling and has little experience, he is completely unaware of this. So after he walked into the elevator, he was already discovered, which led to the current scene that can be called a door-to-door murder. Before he had time to think about how he exposed himself, Peter quickly walked towards the depths of the research office. Along the way, he escaped the siege of a large number of guards with his agility, and soon found the target of this trip, Ivan Vanki. As the villain of the second part of Iron Man, although he is not low in intelligence, he has not developed the whip armor, and his strength is not much stronger than ordinary people. When seeing Peter appearing in front of him, Ivan could be said to have a look of astonishment. Naturally, he heard the alarm from the research office. In his opinion, the blueprint of the new weapon should be stolen by someone from some force, and it has nothing to do with him. But he never imagined that the target of the visitor turned out to be himself, so he was not at all prepared. And many more. Ivan opened his mouth to say something. But Peter didn't give him a chance at all. He went up and grabbed his neck and twisted it hard. He heard a click, and he took the lunchbox directly. Before coming here, Peter had done all kinds of psychological construction, and he also envisioned the scene where he couldn't bear to do it. But when he was discovered that he might face a large number of guards at any time, he suddenly discovered that all his predictions had become a joke. In order not to let himself fall into the siege of the guards, he broke Ivan's neck without any hesitation. This kind of development made him feel at a loss for a moment, not knowing whether he was forced by Tony to do this kind of thing without any burden, or he himself didn't have much resistance to killing people. The confusion didn't last long. When he was awakened by the sound of footsteps, he threw all his thoughts behind him and began to flee from this place. At this time, in the villa, Tony's face also looked a little astonished. He didn't expect the matter to be over so easily, and he was already ready to watch a drama where Peter's heart was at war between heaven and man. Unexpectedly, Peter acted more decisively than he imagined. "Jarvis, am I being deceived by this guy? Judging by his decisive appearance, it doesn't look like he killed someone for the first time." Tony was speechless. Jarvis's voice without emotion suddenly sounded. "Sir, according to research, there is a devil living in everyone's heart. It is a collection of human negative emotions. Some people lock the devil, he is a good person in the eyes of ordinary people. Some people release the devil, he is a bad person in the eyes of ordinary people. According to my observation, Peter in the video is in the stage of locking the devil. Without your intervention, sir, he should have locked the devil in his heart and become a good person. But you gave him a key, sir, and let him unleash the devil. So, this matter, everything is caused by you, sir." Jarvis analyzed for a while, and finally pinned the blame on himself, and Tony couldn't help but twitch his mouth. "Boy, are you still with me? Did you say that about the creator?" Deciding to temporarily refuse to communicate with Jarvis, Tony is going to sleep. The matter was over, and there was no need for him to continue watching. Although the guards of Hammer Industry were good, it was impossible to trap the little spider, so he was naturally too lazy to continue watching. But just as he got up, Jarvis' voice suddenly sounded. "Alert, alert, approaching UFO detected." After saying that, Tony stopped walking, and immediately turned to look at the big screen, only to see that the scene on the screen had changed to the outside of his villa. A green figure in the distance was quickly approaching his villa on a skateboard-like aircraft. Tony even saw the evil ghost mask on the visitor's face. Suddenly, Tony frowned, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "Interesting, Osborn the Green Goblin, you came looking for me before I looked for you." The best candidates to form the Dark Alliance are naturally the famous villains in Marvel. These people are born with a dark heart, which is much easier than recruiting superheroes. So after seeing Osborn at the military procurement meeting, Tony made up his mind to pull this guy into the Dark Alliance. But because this guy hasn't transformed yet, Tony just intends to give him a little stimulation to speed up his transformation. "But I didn't expect that things progressed so quickly. I only stimulated this guy during the day, but at night this guy turned into a green goblin and came to him." Sure enough, life is full of surprises. There was a smile on the corner of his mouth, and a gleam of coldness appeared in Tony's eyes. Recruiting villains is not the same as recruiting superheroes. Superheroes still need to be guided, and villains can be defeated directly. And when Tony found Osborn, outside the villa, Osborn looked at Tony with a crazy smile under his villa mask. In order to keep the Austrian group, he had to conduct human experiments himself. The experiment was unexpectedly smooth, and he perfectly strengthened his body, but he was also affected by the potion, and his personality changed. It can even be said that it is divided into two people. One is a calm character, Osborn, the helm of the Austrian group. One is the tyrannical character, Green Goblin Osborn. And now, he is the Green Goblin Osborn. Osborn has many enemies and many people who hate him, but if one were to make a list, Tony would definitely be at the top of the list. If it weren't for him, Aoshi Group would have won more military orders, and the shareholders would not have withdrawn their capital in advance, driving Aoshi Group to a dead end. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't have personally acted as a test product and experimented with human body enhancers. Although all hidden dangers have been buried after he ordered the development of new equipment and human body strengthening agents. But Tony was the fuse that detonated the bomb. So, he came as a Green Goblin, and he wanted to take revenge and send this guy who pushed the Austrian group to the end to hell. With the desire to kill in his mind, Osborn flicked hard, and the two pumpkin grenades rushed towards Tony's villa. As a new type of grenade researched by the Austrian group, the power of the pumpkin grenade is comparable to that of a kilogram TNT explosion. 2 pumpkin grenades are enough to blow up Tony's villa and bury him alive. But the moment he threw the pumpkin grenade, one after another shadow ninjas came out of the darkness, their scarlet eyes fixed on Osborn. In the next second, 2 cross marks were thrown out from the hands of a shadow ninja, hitting the pumpkin grenade precisely. Bang! 2 violent explosions sounded. Fireworks shone in the dark, lighting up the night. What? Osborn thought with a frown. But before he was given more time to think, a black shadow ninja jumped towards him. The edge of the samurai sword shone in the dark night, and the light of the sword slashed straight at him. Osborn, who was wearing a battle armor, planned to resist the attacks of many shadow ninjas without dodging or evading. ZZ. A burst of sparks appeared on his armor, and the seemingly hard battle armor unexpectedly showed tiny wounds under the cutting of the katana. Aware of this scene, Osborn's face suddenly changed. This is a battle armor made of special alloy. What kind of knife is that? It's so sharp. While thinking, Osborn used the mobility of the flying skateboard to quickly escape from the siege of the shadow ninjas. Originally planning to rush directly into the villa, he looked at the densely packed black shadow ninjas outside the villa, and couldn't help feeling a bit of retreat in his heart. He found that things seemed to be different from what he had imagined. These guys who came out of nowhere were actually guarding Tony. Although their individual strength is not as good as their own, there are too many of them. After watching for a while in midair, Osborn finally disappeared into the night sky while driving the flying skateboard. Inside the villa, Tony looked at the retreating Osborn and smiled playfully. Run away. Interesting. Danger cleared. Sir, what are those things? Jarvis' voice sounded in the villa. The tone was as flat as ever, but Tony noticed the curiosity in his words. Turning around and walking towards the bedroom, he smiled and said, "It's just a group of creatures from the dark. You'll see more later." After answering a sentence, Tony closed the door to rest, and what happened just now left no trace in his heart. The night passed quickly, and on the second day, Tony didn't go to the company as before. After all, he had agreed to take a vacation, so how could he say nothing? After breakfast, he drove his silver sports car and left the villa. As for Happy and the others, he left behind. In this regard, Harpy is very helpless. Since his boss returned from his disappearance, he has become even more detached, and he doesn't take them with him wherever he goes, which makes him very helpless. Downtown, a coffee shop. Tony was sitting by the window, a cup of steaming coffee was misting on the table. Suddenly a figure came in from the door. Order 36, hey, hurry up, please. The young man urged towards the front desk, looking at his watch from time to time, showing a little anxiety. At this moment, a familiar voice came from behind him, hey, little Peter, long time no see. After saying that, Peter suddenly turned his head and looked behind him. After seeing Tony's figure, his face suddenly changed. Tony looked at him with a smile on the corner of his mouth, picked up the coffee on the table and motioned to him, and said with a smile, would you like to sit down and have a drink? Hearing this, Peter hesitated for a moment, and finally walked to sit opposite Tony. Sir, what do you want from me? Our deal should be done, right? His face looked a little helpless. Peter didn't have the slightest liking for this guy who forced him to kill. But helpless, his life is still in his hands, so he can only submit obediently. Tisk, the dignified Spider-Man, the patron saint of New York, has been reduced to the point of delivering meals. It's really surprising. With a sigh in his mouth, Tony took a sip of coffee beautifully, and his expression made him feel like he deserved a beating. Taking a deep breath, Peter suppressed the impulse in his heart, and said again, Sir, it's okay, I'm leaving. I still have to deliver food, and I'm going to be late. Don't worry. Tony put down the coffee in his hand. I have another deal, are you interested in hearing it? Not interested in. Without thinking about it, Peter directly refused. But Tony's unhurried voice continued to sound, ignoring his refusal at all, making his face full of helplessness. Catch someone for me, Norman Osborn, the leader of the Austrian group. Catch him alive and bring him to me. Shet, I refuse. Peter stood up excitedly. No wonder he was so excited. His good friend Harry Osborn is Norman Osborn's son, how could he attack his good brother's family? Looking at his appearance, Tony said with the same smile on his face, 1,000 million yuan. As long as you help me catch him back, I'll give you 1,000 million yuan. Think about what life you are living now. You are poor, and you dare not confess to the girl you like. But with 1,000 million, you can change your status quo. You can change your family to a big house, and you can take a walk and go trip with your loved one. From now on, you don't have to run around for life anymore. Thinking about these beautiful things, do you still find it difficult to accept? At this moment, Tony is like a devil, constantly bewitching Peter and causing people to fall. And Peter, who was extremely excited just now, sat down again at this moment, his face looked cloudy and uncertain. His thoughts continued to flow as Tony said, Mary Jane, the figure of Aunt May kept flashing in his mind. At this moment, he hesitated, and he was no longer as firm as before. But, I can't hurt Harry, he is my best brother. Peter said with a confused face. Tony made a new offer with a smile on his face, 2,000 million. Besides, I didn't intend to hurt him, so you don't need to feel guilty. If I were to kill him, he wouldn't survive tonight, what do you think? Thinking about Tony's ability, Peter was silent, which also meant that he was moved. After an unknown amount of time, Peter finally nodded, okay, I promise you. I want to know why, though. You obviously have the ability, why did you still find me? Peter said seriously. The smile on Tony's face was even bigger, don't get me wrong, I just want to improve your life. After all, the dignified Spider-Man has to run around for a living like everyone else, don't you think it's ridiculous? You are a superpower, surpassing 90.00% of the mortals in the world. In the past, Peter would have refuted this statement. He thought that he was no different from others, except that he had some special abilities. But now, he suddenly realized, yes, I am a transcendent, why should I run around for a living? Order 36 is ready. There was a urging from the front desk. In the past, the voice sounded very normal, but now Peter felt it was extremely harsh. The person in front of him can enjoy his morning tea quietly, why should he keep running around? Thinking of this, he was agitated for a while. However, he still forcibly suppressed the irritability in his heart, went to the front desk, picked up the coffee and left. Through the window, Tony looked at Peter, who rode away on a small electric donkey, with a smile flashing in his eyes. There are only one and countless times to break through the bottom line. If it is said that Ivan was killed before, Vanki can still say that it was persecuted by itself, so now it has no intention of persecuting it. Moreover, he could feel the unwillingness in Peter's heart when he got up. Obviously our Spider-Man has gone astray, and there will never be that warm-blooded and kind little spider again. Thinking of this, Tony couldn't help sighing. What's wrong with this world? The number of bad people is increasing day by day, and the number of good people is decreasing. It's really interesting. Putting down a piece of rice, Tony left the cafe, got into the sports car, and drove away. The roar of the sports car echoed in the street, causing the envious eyes of many passers-by. Some people say that a person's personality is born with him, but Tony thinks that a person's personality is brought about by the acquired environment. What kind of things you experience, what kind of character you will become. When Peter, after experiencing something he has never experienced, no matter whether he is voluntary or voluntary, it is destined that he will not be able to become Spider-Man again. Therefore, his road to blackening is stable. Then, who is my next target? Tony was driving a sports car, and many figures in his memory flashed in his mind. Wandering in the bustling New York City in a sports car, Tony is thinking about where to go today. After finally taking a day off, I can't waste this great time. But just as the so-called plan could not keep up with the changes, when he passed by a building, suddenly there was a huge explosion. Boom! Countless rubble fell from the sky and smashed into the crowd of people on the street. The originally bustling and peaceful street turned into a flesh and blood mill in an instant. Countless corpses and broken arms were splashed, and many people were directly smashed into meat paste by the boulders falling from the sky, which was extremely terrifying. Squeak! There was a sudden sound of brakes, and the vehicle driven by Tony stopped in place. And in front of him, a boulder crashed down, bang! He almost turned into a patty like everyone else. Looking at this scene, Tony has no fear. With the horse charm, he has half an immortal body. As long as he does not die instantly, the horse charm can restore him, so he does not have too much fear. He was just curious, what happened? While thinking, Tony got out of the car and looked up at the building above him. Suddenly, a huge figure entered his eyes, causing his pupils to shrink instantly. Boom! There was a loud explosion, and a green figure fell from the sky. The huge impact on the ground shook hundreds of meters, and cracks spread in all directions like spider webs. The giant looked angry and roared up to the sky. A terrifying sound wave spread throughout Manhattan, and the passers-by who managed to escape the catastrophe all fainted under the loud roar. Only Tony was unaffected and watched this scene unharmed. After the roar, the giant ignored the scene and ran towards the city further away. All the obstacles along the way were torn up or discarded by him. Looking at the back of the giant leaving, the corners of Tony's mouth kept twitching, and a wordless emotion welled up in his heart. Why did the green fat man come out at this time? Can he still play happily? As the bug hero in Marvel, the appearance of Fatty Green instantly unbalanced the power of the Marvel world. Instead of staying in a daze, Tony quickly drove after him after sorting out his emotions. Although the appearance of the green fat man was somewhat unexpected, this is the real world after all, not a movie, so it is not unacceptable. What he is thinking about now is what benefits he can get after the appearance of the green fat man. Recruit him into the Dark Alliance. Stop making trouble, this guy is a ticking time bomb, I don't want to wipe his ass every 3 days. In the late stage of growth, it was a little bit better, this guy can still control himself. Now, this guy is completely crazy. After the transformation, he can't distinguish between enemy and friend. Tony was afraid that after he recruited this guy would kill him immediately. Therefore, the fat green man basically has no chance with the Dark Alliance. However, his value is not limited to that terrifying strength. In the later period, Someone used his blood to copy the gene and created a guy called Abomination, a copy version of the green fat man. Although it doesn't have the unlimited improvement that can be called a bug of the genuine green fat, it is stable. Before and after the transformation, they were able to control themselves, and they were stronger. Therefore, Tony was moved. He didn't have to look for those superheroes, he could also create them himself. The thoughts in his mind were spinning rapidly, but Tony's speed did not slow down in the slightest. He drove the sports car very fast, constantly shuttling through the dilapidated urban area. Before he got close to the area where Lou Fatty was, he had already heard Lou Fatty's unscrupulous roar. As the saying goes, there is rain when there is madness in the sky, and there is trouble with madness. Some people can't stand Liu Pang being so arrogant. General Ross, Liu Pang's old father-in-law, directly mobilized a large number of troops to fight Liu Pang. When Tony came to the edge of the battlefield, he saw a large number of soldiers holding weapons and firing wildly. Tanks rushed to the battlefield one after another, and the roar of artillery fire resounded throughout the city. Under the bombardment of the tanks, the green fat kept retreating, but everything was just a superficial phenomenon. When the smoke cleared, the green fat was fine, and he was still alive and well. He tore up a tank by the way to help. Looking at this scene, Tony decisively found a tall building to watch the battle from a height, and he had no intention of getting involved. With his small arms and legs, he couldn't even carry Lou Fatty's punch, so he didn't want to go up and try. The battle was still going on, and the soldiers suffered heavy losses. Under the iron fist of Lou Fat, these well-trained elite soldiers were like children, and they had no power to parry at all. Just look at Liu Pang, like whack-a-mole, punching a meat pie, and in just 10 minutes, his surroundings were covered with flesh and blood. Its cruelty, even Tony couldn't bear to look directly at it, and at the same time couldn't help complaining about the brain twitch stuff of S.H.I.E.L.D. This guy has killed so many people, but he can still be a superhero, what do you think? While complaining, Tony watched with relish, and finally, it was time for the fat green to transform. The law of energy conservation belongs to the basic law of the universe, and no matter how buggy the green man is, he can't ignore this law. After raging for so long, he finally withered. At that moment, Lou Fatty quickly tore through the military encirclement, ran towards the distance, and disappeared in front of everyone. A dark alley, the alley is full of household garbage, and the stench is dense. Bruce staggered and hid in the alley, looking at his hands in fear. Although he lost his mind after becoming green and fat, he still retained the memory just now after he recovered. He remembered that he had just killed a lot of people. Thinking of this, Bruce couldn't help retching. And the moment he lowered his head, pairs of scarlet eyes appeared in the shadows of the alley, and then black shadow ninjas came out of the darkness. When Bruce looked up again, he saw himself surrounded by a group of guys in black robes. Suddenly, a trace of fear appeared in his eyes. Now he is not that invincible green fat man, but just an ordinary scientific researcher with no power to restrain a chicken. Who are you? Bruce's terrified voice sounded. Naturally, the black ninjas would not answer, and one of them came in front of him in a flash, and a hand knife fell directly on his neck. Suddenly, Bruce fainted gorgeously. After taking down Bruce easily, there was a sound of footsteps coming from outside the alley, and Tony's figure appeared in the alley. Looking at Bruce, his face was full of smiles, and things went smoother than he imagined. He easily took down the green giant, tisk tisk, so happy. Take away. With a wave of his hand, a black shadow ninja stepped forward to pick up Bruce, while the others disappeared into the darkness. Throwing Bruce into the sports car, Tony drove away. Going out for a walk and picking up a green fat man for nothing, this luck is no one else. Returning to the villa with Liu Pang, Tony injected him with a powerful stun agent, some small inventions of the predecessor, which can make a person sleep for a month. In order to ensure that this guy has no problems, Tony sent him to the nutrition cabin again to ensure this guy's physical functions. After doing all this, another problem appeared in Tony's mind. Who should I get to copy this guy's genes? I don't know how. Even if it is the predecessor, I can't handle it. After all, the predecessor is not the main attack. I can also ask Mr. Lan in the movie to help me, but this guy is under the command of General Ross, and looking for him is almost equivalent to exposing myself. He didn't want to confront the US military so quickly, so he had to give up this option. Besides him, there are many other talented scientists, but most of them cannot be found by themselves. After excluding one individual candidate, Tony quickly locked on the target, Reed Richards. This is a scientist who is even more talented than his predecessor, proficient in various disciplines such as mechanics, engineering, artificial intelligence, alien biology, physics, genetics, and genetics. He applies for countless patents every year, and every invention is at the cutting edge of the current technological level. In addition, he has another identity, the future superhero, Mr. Fantastic. With his ability, he must be able to copy enough green and fat genes for himself. Of course, the reason why he was chosen was not only that he was good enough, but also because he was the best at the moment. He is an undoubted genius, and every genius has his own pursuit, and his pursuit is to decipher the secret of human genetics. But the vastness of human genes is so vast that even gods may not be able to figure it out. Therefore, because the research has not progressed for a long time, his research funding has been reduced without limit by the government. According to his memory, this guy is now looking for people to invest in his project, but unfortunately, the major financial groups are not optimistic about him. After all, this field is really hopeless. Capital only cares about profit. Although Reed is a genius, if you can't bring them benefits, they don't care whether you are a genius or not. And it just so happened that Tony lacked everything except money, so Reed was undoubtedly a suitable target. What's more, after he mutates, he can directly absorb him into the Dark Alliance, a deal that kills two birds with one stone. Why not do it? Having determined the target, Tony immediately spoke. Jarvis, help me contact Reed Richards. Okay, sir, connecting. On the other side, in a certain office, Reed was sitting on a chair with a tired face. His research was stuck in a bottleneck, not because of anything else, but because he ran out of money. Research on human genetics is a bottomless pit of burning money. Although he sold a lot of patents and gained a lot of money, it is still a drop in the bucket for his own research. During this period of time, he has not slept well for almost a month in order to attract investment, but it is a pity that there has been little effect. There is simply no consortium of companies willing to invest in themselves. Do you really want to give up? Reed asked himself, but the unwillingness to emerge in his heart made him give up. Just when he was feeling restless, the phone placed on the table suddenly rang again. Jingle bell. The ringing of the phone echoed in the office, but Reed didn't seem to hear it, and didn't even look at it. For research, he mortgaged the property. During this period, the bank's debt collection calls came one after another. He had already suffered from the phobia of the phone ringing, so he didn't want to answer it at all. However, this time the call was particularly persistent, and it rang continuously for 10 minutes, as if he would keep calling if he didn't answer it. Helpless, Reed could only get through the phone, and he was ready to be done. However, the imaginary sound of debt collection did not sound, but a slightly speechless voice. Mr. Reed, is the business so busy? Don't even have time to listen to the phone, Tony said speechlessly. If Reed didn't answer the phone, he would almost scold his mother. What's wrong? The benefactor didn't come to confess, and he dared not answer the phone, if it wasn't for the fact that Reed is a genius. He must let him experience the cruelty of capital. You are, Reed's doubtful voice sounded. I want to invest in your research, do you have time to talk? After the words fell, Reed was stunned for a moment, and Tony's words sounded like sounds of nature to him at the moment. God knows how much effort he has spent in attracting investment during this period. He thought it was hopeless, but suddenly he turned around. For a moment, Reed's tone became a little trembling. I don't know who you are, sir. Although he was very happy, Reed also knew that the investment he needed was not a small amount, and ordinary people were not qualified at all. Tony Stark. When Tony reported his name, Reed suddenly burst out laughing silently. Although he is obsessed with research, he has also heard of Tony's reputation, the largest arms dealer in the United States, and the top consortium in New York. So to speak, Tony, the name Stark is a symbol of wealth. At that moment, Reed nodded repeatedly and said, I have time, Mr. Tony, you say where, I'll go there now. His tone was urgent, as if he was afraid that Tony would run away. Tony was also polite, directly reported his address and hung up the phone. Half an hour later, outside Tony's seaside villa in Liberty City, Reed in a suit appeared at the door. Before he could knock on the door of the villa opened, and Jarvis' voice sounded instantly. "Welcome, Mr. Reed. Mr. Tony is waiting for you on the balcony, please go straight ahead." Listening to Jarvis' guidance, Reed didn't show any surprises. He also has an artificial intelligence, so there is nothing surprising. Maybe this is the standard configuration for a scientific research leader, with an artificial intelligence for each person. On the balcony, Tony was dressed in casual clothes, leaning on a deck chair basking in the sun, and a bottle of Romani Conti was placed on the table. The sun, the sea, the breeze, everything seemed so comfortable. When Reed arrived, Tony pointed to the seat beside him and said, "Sit down, have a drink first, and chat slowly." "Okay, thank you for the invitation." Reed responded with a smile, and then sat next to Tony. At this moment, he was not as impatient as he appeared on the phone, but seemed calm and unhurried. The two looked at the sea, tasted the red wine, and looked at each other. They were both top scientists in the United States and well-known geniuses outside the world. This was the first time they met. One is unrestrained and free, and the other is elegant and polite, quite a bit like a king sees a king. Soon, the red wine in the glass bottomed out, and the two finally started talking about business. "I wonder how much Mr. Tony plans to invest." Reed put down his glass and asked, with a trace of eagerness in his eyes. Looking at Reed's eyes, Tony's mouth curled into a smile. "How much do you want?" "The more the merrier," Reed said bluntly. Tony raised an eyebrow immediately. "Then how much would it cost to acquire your team?" Tony asked a question that Reed didn't expect. Reed couldn't help frowning. He came here to talk about investment, not to sell himself. "Mr. Tony, I don't work for anyone or any company, I only accept business investment," he said with a serious face, but Tony smiled indifferently. "Everyone has their own price. If you don't agree, it means that my price is not enough. Why don't you do this? I'll make a price. Listen and see." After the words fell, without giving Reed a chance to refuse, Tony directly asked the price. "With an annual research funding of 500 billion meters gold, you have absolute autonomy, and no one, including me, will interfere with your research. In addition, you and your team enjoy half of the profits of the things you research. What do you think of the price?" Tony looked at Reed with a smile on his face, while Reed remained calm and didn't speak. It's not that he didn't respond, but that he didn't know what to say. Although he was extremely resolute before, Tony gave too much. 500 billion meters of gold, more than his previous combined research funding, and this is only 1 year's funding. Absolute autonomy ensures that one's own research will not be interfered with in any way, no different from what he is doing now. Although half of the research profits are shared by the entire team, it is still much higher than it is now. When other consortiums invest in his research, at least the profits will be taken away, and the rest will belong to him and his team. An increase in profits represents a profit of 1 billion, tens of billions of rice. He really wanted to refuse as firmly as before and stick to his bottom line, but he couldn't say anything when the words of rejection came to his lips. Therefore, he could only remain silent. As for his reaction, Tony was not surprised. In his whole life, he pursued nothing more than fame and fortune. This is a real world, not a movie from a previous life. Superheroes are people too, and they need money and food. Do you really think that everyone can generate electricity for love and protect all mankind? Don't make trouble, everyone is very busy. It is still credible for an individual to have lofty ideals, but a group of extraordinary people gather together just to be babysitters for others, and it is still free. Is it possible? It can only be said that those movies in the previous life forcibly endowed many heroes with lofty ideals for the development of the plot. In fact, everyone is an ordinary person, at most an ordinary person with some superpowers, money, status, beautiful women. Whoever doesn't like it, can really all become saints. What do I need to pay? Reed asked dryly. He no longer thinks about rejection, and he doesn't believe that he doesn't need to pay anything after getting such a big benefit. It's very simple. I have been working for me. In addition, I need your help with some things, and you can't refuse. Anything else? Reed asked. Tony shrugged. No, that's all. After the words fell, Reed thought silently again. There is no doubt that as long as he accepts this contract, he and his team will be tied to Tony for the rest of their lives. So, is it worth it? It's a question worth pondering, and one he'll need to discuss with his team members. Thinking of this, Reed apologized. Mr. Tony, I need to go back and think about it. No problem, I'll give you 3 days, come to me after you've made up your mind. Hearing this, Reed nodded, then got up and left the villa. Along the way, Reed's head seemed a little dizzy, and the huge benefits made him lose his previous calmness. When he returned to his company, he immediately called his team. Soon, 2 men and a woman appeared in the meeting room, and they were also members of the future Fantastic Four: Susan, Storm, Johnny, Storm, Ben, Graham. Looking at Reed's calm expression, the 3 of them thought he was still worrying about research funding, so they all started talking. Reed, is the company out of money? We still have some savings here. We will call you later, let's support it for a while. Hearing what they said, Reed looked up at the crowd, then shook his head. Don't worry about the research funding. I've found someone to invest in, but I'm hesitant to accept it, so I ask you to discuss it. After the words fell, several people couldn't help being overjoyed, and Johnny even said directly, there is nothing to discuss about this. It is a good thing for someone to invest, just agree directly. Ben was more focused than Johnny. Looking at Reed's calm face, he asked, is it true that they want too much of it? It doesn't matter. As long as someone invests, we should give up some benefits. That's right, Reed, don't think too much about us. If you think it's appropriate, just agree directly. Susan also spoke in comfort. Apparently, she and Ben had an idea. Seeing everyone thinking about themselves, Reed couldn't help showing a smile on his face. No, the other party's conditions are very loose, but he is not simply investing in projects, he wants to invest in our team. After finishing speaking, Reed explained Tony's conditions and the price they had to pay to everyone. After listening, everyone fell silent. Needless to say, the conditions, no one cannot be tempted. However, they have to be tied to one person all the time in the future, which makes them hesitate. After all, no one can tell what the future holds. After a long time, Johnny took the initiative and said, ahem, everyone, I don't know if you know one thing. Stark Industries is delisted. Okay. Everyone looked at him suspiciously. Johnny continued. Not long ago, Stark Industries delisted and completed privatization. That is to say, our investor Tony holds 100% of Stark Industries shares. As a military enterprise, do you think Stark Industries may go bankrupt overnight? Speaking of this, everyone realized what Johnny meant. After the privatization of Stark Industries, unless there are problems in the business of Stark Industries itself, resulting in a breakdown of the capital chain and bankruptcy of the company, it will basically not be defeated. The military industry is one of the most profitable industries in the world, and the U.S. military spends a large amount of military expenses every year to purchase and replace equipment. So, basically, unless the United States is destroyed, it is basically impossible for Stark Industries to go bankrupt. Not absolute, of course, but the chances of something going wrong for other reasons are extremely small. So do they still need to worry about the future they are worried about? After thinking through this layer, everyone's faces suddenly became less dull, and became lighter visible to the naked eye. I think it's not bad to agree to this condition. Ben was the first to issue a suggestion. Compared with the other 3 who were single, he had already married. After knowing the stability of Stark Industries, he had almost no worries. After he spoke, Johnny followed closely and agreed to Tony's conditions. Susan did not express her position immediately, but still looked at Reed. The 2 are currently still in a boyfriend and girlfriend relationship, and she listens to Reed. And Reed also happened to look at her at this moment, with a smile on his face, and joked, actually, after listening to his conditions, I was already tempted, but I was worried that you would disagree, so I didn't agree directly. After the words fell, everyone laughed. At this point, everyone voted unanimously to work for Tony. The next day, Reed came to Tony's villa again. It seems that you have thought it through. Tony smiled. Reed nodded directly. Now that the decision has been made, there is no need to procrastinate. You will be my boss from now on. I don't know when to sign the contract. Sign now. Tony took out a contract that had already been prepared, and Reed read it carefully, and after confirming that there were no problems with all the terms, he directly signed his name with a pen. After signing the contract, Reed immediately changed his attitude. Boss, when will our research funding arrive? Seeing his eager look, Tony said directly, it will take a little preparation time, and the account will arrive in 3 days. But you have to do one thing for me first. What's the matter? Reed asked suspiciously. Tony didn't explain, but got up directly and said, follow me. Immediately, he took the lead and walked towards the underground research room in his own villa. Reed quickly followed, and the two soon came to the research room. Reed also saw Bruce sleeping in the nutrition cabin. Immediately, Reed's expression changed, and he said in surprise, Boss, what is this? Bruce Banner, a fat green man who can transform, you should have seen the news. When Tony said this, Reed immediately remembered the hottest news at the moment. The green monsters ravaged Neo, and the citizens suffered heavy casualties. Yesterday, the news spread throughout the United States. Even if Reed didn't care much about the news, he had seen the news. Boss, what do you mean? He is the monster that ravages girls. Yes, I happened to be there at the time, and I got him back after he passed out. Tony said it easily, but Reed clucked his tongue endlessly. He had seen clips of news reports. The horror of the green fat makes people dare not approach him at all. My own boss took this guy back to his villa while he was in a coma. But after sighing, Reed's gaze at Bruce suddenly became hot. No scientist can refuse to study green fat, and Reed is no exception. After figuring out that the guy in front of him was not an ordinary person, Reed asked directly, Boss, what do you want me to do? It's very simple, copy this guy's gene and create a god. Tony looked at Reed and said every word, and Reed's body trembled suddenly, not from fear, but from excitement. After seeing the destructive power of the green fat, who would not want to have this power? And the theory of making gods made him even more excited. At that moment, Reed patted his chest and said, Boss, don't worry, leave it to me, and I will definitely find out the secret behind him. Tony nodded in satisfaction. Okay, then you will stay here to deal with this guy, and I will give you a hint, you can start with his blood. I understand. In response, Reed went straight to work, and Tony didn't bother, and left the institute directly. He believes that Reed will not let him down, and he will soon reap the results. Here, Tony is busy gaining the power of the green fat, and on the other hand, Peter is also planning how to capture Osborn alive. Although I feel a little sorry for Harry, it is still the old saying that once the valve of desire is opened, it is not so easy to close it. With the help of his good relationship with Harry, Peter easily figured out where his family lived. When night fell, Peter in the spider suit left the house again. Standing among the tall buildings, Peter quickly came to the wealthy area of Manhattan. Looking at the luxurious villas and manors, Peter, who hadn't had any thoughts before, felt envious, jealous, and hated in his heart at this moment. I am an extraordinary person, why should I be crowded in the slums, but these people can live here decently. If a blackening progress bar appears at this time, the pattern of +1+1+1 will definitely appear continuously on Peter's head. According to the information obtained during the day, Peter successfully found Harry's villa. Using the spider silk hanging upside down in the trees outside the villa, Peter quickly figured out the situation inside the villa. A middle-aged man in pajamas, a few servants, Harry is not at home. Needless to say, Peter fixed his eyes on the middle-aged man, looking at Norman who was sitting on the sofa and reading the newspaper, Osborn. Without the slightest hesitation, Peter directly launched a surprise attack. Boom! The glass was smashed directly, and Peter, who thought Norman was an ordinary person, chose to act forcefully and broke into the villa. Seeing Peter who broke into the villa, the servants in the villa screamed loudly. And Peter has quickly come to Norman, grabbed his collar and tried to take him away forcibly. But at this moment, a fist suddenly landed on his chest. Because he was defenseless, he didn't react at all, and his figure was thrown flying like a cannonball. Bang! Bang! A sound spread through the villa, and Peter fell to the ground bowed, surrounded by debris. At this moment, his mind was bewildered. Who am I, where am I, and what am I doing? What about ordinary people? How easy is it to say yes? Kicking himself flying more than 10 meters with one punch, is this also called an ordinary person? A series of doubts popped up in his mind. He resisted the pain and stood up, looking in Norman's direction. I saw that Norman, who was still sitting on the sofa just now, disappeared at some point. Peter looked around quickly, searching for signs of Norman. At this moment, a burst of strange laughter resounded through the villa. In the next second, a guy wearing a demon mask on a green skateboard charged directly at Peter. Seeing this scene, Peter's pupils shrank, and his body twisted quickly, but he was still a bit slower, and was hit on the waist by the flying skateboard. Puff! Peter's throat was sweet, and a bloody smell filled his mouth. Before he had time to think about it, he endured the pain and rushed directly to the outside of the villa. The intelligence was wrong. This guy was not an ordinary person at all. Peter didn't dare to stay here anymore. He quickly escaped from the villa and disappeared into the night. Night-shrouded Neo City, Queen's District, a certain residential house. Peter's figure flashed in from the second floor. Pulling off the hood casually, a mouthful of blood spit out from his mouth. A burst of cursing kept ringing out of his mouth, and he quickly picked up the phone and dialed Tony's contact information. Beep. Soon, the call was connected, and before he could speak, Peter suppressed his anger and said, "That guy is not an ordinary person at all, your information is wrong. Are you trying to kill me?" On the other side, Tony held the red wine glass and kept shaking it in his hand. Hearing Peter's angry voice, a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "I'm going to kill you, you're already dead. And I never said that guy was normal. What on earth are you trying to do?" Peter said angrily. "As I said, you capture that guy alive to me, that's my purpose." "Impossible, that guy is extremely powerful, and I am not an opponent." Speaking of this, Peter's tone was a little depressed. After the mutation, although he didn't say anything, he was still very happy in his heart. But since he met Tony, he found that everything has changed, and any cat or dog who comes out casually is better than himself. To sum it up, it's people and ghosts who are showing off, but I'm the only one being beaten. Hearing the disappointment in his words, the smile on Tony's face deepened. "Want to become stronger? I can help you." After the words fell, Peter became vigilant on the other end of the phone. There is no such thing as a free lunch, especially when dealing with Tony. "What conditions?" he asked cautiously. "It's very simple. I plan to form a dark alliance, and now I invite you to join." Tony took a sip of the red wine in his hand, and said calmly, "I'm a good guy," Peter boasted. "I didn't say you are not a good person, I just let you join the Dark Alliance, think about it." After the words fell, Peter on the other end of the phone suddenly fell into a long silence. The Dark Alliance, it's not a good place to listen to the name, but think about the way I was beaten today and fled in embarrassment. A burst of anger rose from his heart again, and finally Peter gritted his teeth. "I agree to join." As soon as these words came out, Tony laughed instantly. After planning for so long, he finally took down this guy. "Congratulations, you made a wise choice. Come to me tomorrow morning, and I will give you what you want." After speaking, Tony hung up the phone impatiently, and clicked on the system panel. Name: Tony Stark. Gender: male. Identity: heir of the Shadow Kingdom. Abilities: Horse Talisman, Sombra Ninja Mastery, Sombra Blade Mastery. Number of draws: 1. Dark Alliance member: Spider-Man. Looking at the information on the system panel, a corner of his mouth curled up, and at the same time, his thoughts moved accordingly. Immediately, black shadows rose from the ground and appeared in front of him, standing in place respectfully. Unlike the Sombra Ninja, Sombra Throwing Blade has special steel claws on its hands and feet, resembling Wolverine. Their abilities are not as comprehensive as Sombra Ninja, but their fighting power is stronger than Sombra Ninja. It can be said that it was born for fighting. After carefully observing the Razor Blade Ninjas, Tony nodded in satisfaction and sent them back to the Shadow Kingdom, while he opened the lottery panel. It's an exciting time again. Even though Tony's mood has grown a lot, he still feels a little nervous when facing the lottery roulette. Lottery. With a low shout in my heart, suddenly, the pointer on the roulette rotated rapidly. Stop. The speed of the pointer slowed down, and Tony looked at the pointer eagerly, praying for a powerful ability in his heart. Soon, the pointer stopped. In the next second, a dragon-shaped pattern appeared on the roulette, and a dragon roar sounded. Under Tony's gaze, the dragon shadow jumped out of the roulette, and instantly got into his body. Hot. Extremely hot. Tony felt that the temperature in his body rose to the extreme in an instant, and a dragon-shaped mass emerged on the surface of his skin, exuding an astonishingly high temperature. A few minutes later, the dragon pattern disappeared, and Tony returned to normal again. "Sir, are you all right?" Jarvis' voice sounded. "It's okay, don't worry." Tony opened his eyes and smiled. Dragon spells, abilities, and dragon blasts can dissolve everything in the world. This is the information that popped up in Tony's mind after he gained the ability of the dragon charm. In order to test the specific power, Tony walked into the underground research room, glanced at the fanatical read, and took out a piece of gold titanium alloy from the material warehouse. This is one of the hardest metals in the Marvel world. It is generally used in aerospace materials and is resistant to high and low temperatures. According to the records of the previous life, the predecessor used gold titanium alloy when building the steel armor. Leaving the institute, Tony sat on the balcony looking at the palm-sized gold titanium alloy, and a flame ignited in his palm. Suddenly, the gold titanium alloy in his hand changed instantly, melting rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. In just a few seconds, the gold titanium alloy burned into a pool of molten iron, and quickly evaporated into gas. 10 seconds later, the gold titanium alloy in his hand completely disappeared, leaving no residue at all. "Hiss," Tony gasped, his face full of horror. Although he knew that the dragon talisman was very powerful, he didn't expect it to be so strong that the gold titanium alloy couldn't hold it for even 10 seconds and immediately vaporized. "It's simply perverted, but I like it." His heart was filled with excitement, and it wasn't until midnight that Tony calmed down completely and went to rest. Early the next morning, Tony was woken up by Jarvis. "Sir, a young man came outside and said he has an appointment with you." Waking up from the bed in a daze, Tony glanced at the scene projected by Jarvis, and Peter was waiting outside the door. "Let him come in." "Okay, sir," Jarvis responded. The door opened, and Peter walked into the villa cautiously. When he came to the living room, Tony yawned and walked down the stairs, and said, "Hello, by the way, here we are." "Ah," Peter nodded, a little embarrassed. Tony ignored him. After swiping out the rewards, his interest in Peter dropped greatly, and he walked into the kitchen to make himself a cup of hot milk. "Mr. Tony, tell me, it can help me become stronger." After sitting for a long time, seeing that Tony hadn't spoken, Peter could only speak on his own initiative. "Yes, just a moment." Tony froze for a moment, but quickly realized that this was something he had promised. After drinking the hot milk in his hand, Tony, who was warm in his stomach, walked towards Peter. Under Peter's nervous eyes, he reached out and patted him on the shoulder. "Okay, done, go, finish the task as soon as possible." "Water." Peter looked confused, he felt he was being played. Marvel. I inherited the kingdom of shadows. Loving care novel read online. "Mr. Tony, what are you?" Peter asked in bewilderment. Tony sat on the sofa in the living room and looked at him calmly. "What, think I'm kidding you? I have given you the power, feel it well." Hearing this, Peter frowned and began to sense deeply. With his powerful spider sensing ability, Peter soon found out that something was wrong. There seemed to be an inexplicable force in his body, and this force made him inexplicably terrified. In the next second, he tried to mobilize that power, and immediately, black figures appeared beside him, looking at him with scarlet eyes. Seeing this scene, Peter's heart skipped a beat, and he took a few steps back subconsciously, but soon, he felt that he had a special connection with these shadow ninjas, and he could control them. Thinking of this, Peter turned his head to look at Tony on the sofa, swallowed dryly and said, "This is the strength you gave me." "Yeah." Tony smiled and nodded. Peter became excited instantly. He still remembered being beaten into a dead dog by these shadow ninjas. He didn't expect that he would be able to control these people one day. With their help, Norman is nothing. While thinking about it, Peter excitedly manipulated the shadow ninja, having a great time playing. Tony watched the scene quietly, without the slightest emotion in his eyes. As the controller of the shadow ninja, Tony can plant the shadow mark on anyone, allowing them to control the shadow army. Of course, the ultimate control is still in Tony, and Peter is just borrowing it. As long as Tony is willing, the shadow core will be out of Peter's control in an instant. In this way, not only has the power of the Dark Alliance been enhanced, Peter has also completely fallen into Tony's surveillance. Perfect. Okay, go, remember to bring Norman back to me, don't make me wait too long. Okay, Mr. Tony. Peter nodded excitedly, and then left the villa. After he left, Tony didn't stay in the villa too much, and directly contacted a few girls to play happily together. After being busy for so long, he also needs to relax. On the other side, in the S.H.I.E.L.D. meeting room, Pierce sat at the head, while the elite members of S.H.I.E.L.D. sat on both sides of the meeting room. At this moment, everyone was looking down at the materials in their hands, and there was no other noise in the huge conference room except for the sound of flipping through the materials. After a long time, Pierce knocked on the table, coughed lightly, and said, "Have you finished watching? What do you think of Tony Stark?" Mystery. Extremely dangerous. Anti-government tendencies cannot be ruled out. A number of S.H.I.E.L.D. elites spoke one after another. This is the conclusion they came to after reading the data. Since the Obadiah incident, Pierce has been paying attention to Tony and started his investigation. In addition to sending Natasha to sneak into Stark Industries, he also arranged a lot of forces to keep an eye on him. In this era of Skynet, with the power of S.H.I.E.L.D., it is almost impossible to monitor a person. Therefore, under the close monitoring of S.H.I.E.L.D., almost all of Tony's actions during this period were exposed under S.H.I.E.L.D.'s nose. Whether it is using the power of the Shadow Corps or contacting Peter, it is all in the records of S.H.I.E.L.D. If it's just that, that's all, but the scene where Tony took Bruce away was also noticed by S.H.I.E.L.D. Naturally, it is impossible for S.H.I.E.L.D. not to pay attention to things like the Green Fat rioting in New York. After seeing the power displayed by the Green Fat, no one cannot be tempted. Including S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra. And Pierce, who is the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and a Hydra spy, fell in love immediately. This led to today's meeting. It seems that everyone is very aware of Tony's danger. If that's the case, let's talk about your opinion, arrest him directly, or how to say it. Pierce said unhurriedly, but the elites of S.H.I.E.L.D. below fell silent at this moment, their faces full of hesitation. Tony is not one of those extraordinary people with no background. Behind him is Stark Industries, as the top consortium in the United States. The power of Stark Industries is far from being as simple as it appears on the surface. Behind Stark Industries, there are at least double-digit congressmen standing, and the relationship between Stark Industries and the military is even closer to the extreme. According to rumors, the current president of the United States took office with the help of Stark Industries. Therefore, touching Tony is not something that can be decided with a slap in the head. It involves too much, and even S.H.I.E.L.D. may not be able to withstand Stark Industries' revenge. Seeing everyone's silence, Pierce also knew what they were worried about. Immediately knocked on the table and said, "Tony is Tony, Stark Industries is Stark Industries, what we want to target is not Stark Industries, but Tony. As long as we can capture Tony before Stark Industries reacts, I believe that the power behind Stark Industries is not willing to go to war and fight us to the death. After all, what they need is Stark Industries, not Tony." After the words fell, everyone's eyes moved one after another, and they all understood Pierce's meaning. If they arrest Tony with great fanfare, then of course not, the resistance from Stark Industries is enough to make it difficult for them to move. But if Tony is captured secretly, when the matter becomes a foregone conclusion, the power behind Stark Industries may not necessarily die with their S.H.I.E.L.D. After all, without a Tony, Stark Industries is still operating as usual and can still help them. And at this moment, a strong black man in the meeting room stood up. Just this is not enough. Once the matter is exposed, our S.H.I.E.L.D. alone may not be able to withstand the pressure from above. After all, Tony now holds 100% of the shares of Stark Industries, and the people above will not easily let him have an accident. At that time, even if you catch him, you will let him go. Hearing this, everyone immediately realized that the current Stark Industries is a dictatorial enterprise. Pierce also frowned. Then Nick, what's your suggestion? Find someone to act together. Nick Fury said in a deep voice. As the future director of S.H.I.E.L.D., he thinks more comprehensively. Bruce is wanted by the military. General Ross has been arresting Bruce. As long as we provide information, General Ross will not let go of this opportunity. Together with the military, even if the people above blame it, the military will share part of the pressure for us. Hearing this proposal, Pierce frowned instantly. The reason why he moved Tony was to gain Bruce's power. If the military intervenes, there may be twists and turns in the matter. But seeing the excitement of everyone present, he couldn't object, so he could only nod his head and said, "In this case, let's join forces with the military to conduct a secret operation. This matter must be kept absolutely secret. Before the matter is over, no one is allowed to reveal it, otherwise don't blame me for being rude." At the end of the meeting, Pierce handed over the matter of contacting General Ross to Nick. After everyone dispersed, a figure walked into Pierce's office. His name is Hitwell, Pierce's assistant, and one of the Hydra spies lurking in S.H.I.E.L.D. "Director, you are looking for me." Sitwell looked respectful. With his back turned to him, Pierce turned slowly, looked at him and said, "S.H.I.E.L.D. has decided to arrest Tony. You go and inform Bucky. After the operation starts, quickly find Bruce and take him away." "I understand the chief." Hitwell nodded and left the office immediately. Seeing his leaving figure, Pierce was slightly relieved. With the military intervening, it is unlikely that he will detain Bruce, so it is best for someone to take Bruce away directly. Even if Bruce is found missing by then, the military can only find Tony, not him. On the other side, Nick, who accepted the mission, also came to the military area to meet General Ross. After explaining his intentions, Nick waited for General Ross's reaction. Boom, boom, boom. General Ross tapped on the table, his sharp eyes fixed on Nick. "Is what you said true? Bruce is in the hands of Tony Stark?" "That's right, General, the news has been confirmed, there will be no fakes." Nick Fury affirmed. "So, you plan to do something to Tony? Then do you know how many weapons Stark Industries provides to the military every year? You moved Tony, do you think the military will just sit back and ignore it?" General Ross spoke in a calm tone, his words were full of coldness, as if he wanted to stand up for Tony. Looking at this scene, Nick did not panic, but a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "General, as far as I know, you have always wanted to capture Bruce, and I heard that you and Stark Industries are not very good." Speaking of this, Nick didn't continue, but the meaning was very clear: everyone has the same goal, so don't pretend. Where there are people, there are fights, and the military is no exception. The U.S. military is divided into two factions, the Hawks and the Doves, and the Dove generals have a better relationship with Stark Industries. As the political opponents of the Doves, the Hawks naturally dislike all forces close to the Doves. Usually that's all. Once something happens, they don't have any scruples. In the same way, the same is true for the Doves, which is one of the reasons why Nick dared to approach General Ross openly. Slightly raising his brows, General Ross's expression remained calm. "In that case, let's just say it, what does S.H.I.E.L.D. need me for? Help us block the pressure from the military, and then Bruce will be handed over to the general." "Not enough." General Ross shook his head directly. "Bruce, I can also send someone to arrest, you don't need to give it. If you want me to help you, show your sincerity." General Ross's resolute refusal made Nick secretly curse the old fox. Fortunately, he had already prepared before coming, so after General Ross refused, Nick continued to ask, "The design drawings for the laser gun." After the words fell, General Ross's eyes and pupils shrank, and he stopped even knocking on the table. "The laser gun is the exclusive equipment of S.H.I.E.L.D., and it is powerful. The military has always been watching this gun, but because it is independently developed by S.H.I.E.L.D., they have no way to let S.H.I.E.L.D. take the initiative to hand it over." He didn't expect Nick to take out this thing as a bargaining chip, which instantly hit his weakness. "Okay, it's a deal, but the drawings must be given to me first." "It is good." The two negotiated the terms smoothly, and Nick didn't stay any longer, and got up and left directly. Having relieved their worries, S.H.I.E.L.D. quickly launched an operation, and a large number of elite agents directly dispersed and deployed around Tony's villa, looking for opportunities to attack. Similarly, after sending Nick away, General Ross quickly summoned his elite squad and arranged for them to work with S.H.I.E.L.D. to bring Bruce back. S.H.I.E.L.D. and the military are in action, and Tony is enjoying life unknowingly at the moment. Celebrities, models, and many beauties became Tony's prey. In just 3 days, Tony had dinner with more than a dozen batches of beauties, and rewarded himself well. For this reason, Pot's gaze towards him these days has become extremely resentful. However, after several days of debauchery, Tony's happy life was forced to end, and Reed's research made a breakthrough. In the underground research room, Tony walked in quickly. Reed, who was standing in front of the test bench, turned his head when he heard the movement. Seeing Tony, a look of excitement appeared on his face. "Boss, you are here, come and take a look." Listening to the greeting, Tony walked quickly to the experimental bench, on which there was a biological chamber with a small white mouse inside. I saw the little white mouse in the biological warehouse chewing on a hollow iron ball with food inside. And Reed also introduced it with excitement at this moment. I eliminated the berserk factor in that guy's blood, leaving only the enhanced gene. After injecting that guy's blood, this little guy not only strengthened his body in all directions, but also increased his strength by more than 10 times. If the human body can adapt to this force, then we can mass-produce Captain America. No, even stronger than Captain America. Listening to Reed's narration, Tony couldn't help being a little moved. A U.S. captain can overthrow an army. If there are 100, 1,000, or 1 U.S. captains, how terrible it would be. I kept thinking about it in my mind, but Tony quickly put aside this unrealistic idea. Not to mention that human experiments have not yet been carried out. Even if the experiments are successful, it is impossible to mass-produce Captain America. After all, this power comes from Liu Pang's blood. Even if Liu Pang is drained, it is impossible to create 1 American captains. How high is the success rate of human experiments, and what are the side effects? Tony quickly calmed down and asked. Hearing this, the excitement on Reed's face also dissipated a lot. According to my estimates, the success rate of human experiments is above 80.00%. As for the side effects, it kills growth. According to my research, the berserk factor contained in this guy's blood may make him lose his mind temporarily, but it can also make his strength continue to increase. In other words, he will continue to get stronger as time goes by. Moreover, after injecting this serum, the strength of the injector is almost fixed, and it is impossible to improve it through any means, and there is no way to transform like that guy. Having said that, Reed shook his head regretfully. But Tony is not disappointed. The height that human beings can reach is limited. Except for a few people, most people in the world will not be able to break through the limits of the human body in their lifetime. Potential aside, this is almost a perfect enhancer. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.